All right, so I guess we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here on this crisp October afternoon. And we are making progress, and we are almost there, folks. I will draw our attention to the schedule. Michelle couldn't be here today, so I'm just going to be doing my best impression of Michelle, trying to keep us on task. So, as you can see, this month we are due to discuss the revised draft report, which you should all have received. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to walk you through that shortly. And then the final draft report is due on November 13th. And then we're going to go ahead and review and approve that final draft with your comments by December 12th so that we could submit it to the legislature by the end of that month. So you're going to have a little bit of a turnaround time after today. We're going to give you, 7-10 days. Where did we have the actual?
It's the 18th, so 7 days.
Okay, 7 days to make some additional comments after we review it today. Submit those to us. We're going to turn around a clean copy so that you can take a look at that by November 1st, I think we said?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So this will be the agenda today. We're going to go ahead and review that draft report, about 30 minutes. And then I will turn it over to Mary Beth, who's going to walk you through the portal, the medical portal, and what's to come and how that might impact the world of IMEs. And then Stephanie will discuss the advisory committee questionnaire and updated recommendations, mostly going through some of the loose ends, some of those additional topics that came up last time, and how we feel about those, if there's any additional consensus. And then wrapping up, discussing any potential consensus, and then our next steps.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Sure. Who is that super friendly person who said that?
That's Mindy.
Oh, Mindy. You know what I failed to do? We didn't do our typical introductions, so thank you, Mindy, for the reminder. We'll start in-house. Everyone, please introduce yourselves. Starting with myself, I'm the chair, Clarissa.
Mary Beth Woods, Executive Director. Stephanie Zufali.
Lev Ginsberg, the Business Council.
Joe Nolte, State Insurance Fund.
Justin Teff, Kirk and Teff.
Joe Cannabis, New York State AFL-CIO.
Matt Mead, lawyer.
Just lawyer.
I'm Petrozello, Amtrust Financial.
David Wartime, WCB.
Okay, and we'll move on to Mindy in Brooklyn.
I'm Mindy Roller, New York City Law Department, Chief of the Workers' Comp Division.
Okay, welcome, Mindy. Manhattan.
Robert Goldberg, Dr. Robert Goldberg Medical Society, the state of New York, surrounded by my friends.
Your invisible friends. Rochester.
Brian Trick, Wegmans Food Markets, and I do have to leave at 1:40, I apologize.
Okay. And White Plains.
Rick Weinstein, orthopedic surgeon, also do IME exams, and in private practice working for White Plains Hospital.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
Natasha Cardinal, Evangelist, the Workers' Comp Board.
All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the draft IME report, which everyone should have received. And we'll take a look at it together, and if you guys have any comments, you can either share them now or subsequently in writing and let us know what suggested edits or comments you may have. So as you can see, we'll start with a table of contents, just sort of laying out the basic 5 parts of the report. In the first part, we're just going to lay out very brief background on why IMEs, what are IMEs, some of the reforms that have informed this conversation and the formulation of the advisory committee. And we'll also lay out our charge, our legislative charge, and why we've convened, who was convened in this committee, and the actual committee members will also be laid out here. We'll also briefly touch on the open meetings law. Then in part 2, there's going to be an executive summary. And this is going to be also very brief, maybe a paragraph or two, just basically laying out the media-friendly version of summarizing the committee's charge and the results of having convened the committee. So we're gonna probably draft that in a week or so, and depending on what recommendations, if any, are laid out, we're gonna be summarizing those in that executive summary. That's why you don't see it right now, because we don't yet have consensus on what we're recommending, if anything. Part 3, we're just laying out our methodology, and this goes through what we've done this past year as a committee, but also discusses the utilization report and the data that we've gathered. Then we also move on to the topics that we've considered and the topic dates, as well as any information and data that we've considered, and any particular issues. So part 4 is basically a summary of the key points that we've, the key points and the key conversations that we've had throughout the year. So we're starting with the very first topics and what was discussed at each of those meetings. So make sure you pay close attention to that, so that if you have any comments on what you feel was discussed, maybe that we've missed and we didn't capture here, now's your opportunity to do that. So the meat right now is in part 4, where we go through each of those topics. And let's see, then we, after part 4, just going to the very end, I'll draw your attention to page 17, the recommendations summary. So this is where we tried to capture in a more digestible format what the recommendations were by topic. And you guys have seen something like this that we've shared with you previously, so this shouldn't necessarily be new information for you. But we're going ahead and adding that here unless there are strong feelings otherwise. And part 5 is where we're going to, yes.
Hi, it's Rick Weinstein. I had a question.
Yes, please.
Page 10 of 20, 4.1.4. That's on the full parity of NPS and LCSWs. I thought we did reach a consensus that it was not recommended. I think there was very few people speaking against having full parity.
Okay.
Well, I think the recommendation, the no recommendation means no change. So there's existing, that's the existing, there's no change to the current law. Are you suggesting we're changing it?
No, but I think we should say no specific recommendation. I think the consensus among everyone except for 1 or 2 people was that it should not be parity. And I think we should state that because I think it makes it more clear. Our opinion is not that there's no consensus, but there is consensus that it should not have parity.
Well, I don't think we had unanimous consensus on that, did we?
We didn't have unanimous, but we had consensus.
I would like to support that, and also in the third line from the end, it says, even though it could help, we didn't agree to that. You could say, even though it was thought by some that it may help, because it could is a very hard conclusion.
I felt like it was more of a push towards parity than non-parity the way I read it, and I thought the consensus was the opposite.
Well, I just want to make sure that, and that maybe it's important to just take a pause here and talk about the report format and make sure that we're all in agreement, or if not, we need to figure out how, if we're going to change the approach, because the way this was drafted was envisioning that it would talk about the topic, a summary of a discussion, and whether or not there was consensus across the board to make a change. So it's not like majority rules was the understanding that we had, and if there's a debate on that, let us know, but we thought it was, we are only gonna make recommendations if everybody on the committee agreed to do something.
But, speaking as a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not as good with specific wording. My understanding of consensus means that majority agrees. It doesn't mean 100%.
We had laid out in the beginning that we were going towards a unanimous consensus. I mean, we had spelled that out when we began, so that means everyone.
And there are a host of other proposals that other people were not so thrilled about that would be carried by a majority vote, and so I think we should be cautious about going down that road.
Yeah.
So on the substance of this issue, Doctor, I'm in agreement with you,
Yeah.
but I don't agree on at least my understanding. My understanding was that it was going to be unanimity. You know, I have some concerns about this. I'm not going to go into great detail. I'll share them within the appropriate time. But you know, there are some issues, you know, where I think certain things were worded in a way that made it seem like, although there wasn't unanimity, this would be some type of beneficial outcome. You know, my understanding was that it was unanimity, and that is a big part of the reason why I didn't hem and haw and crow about the makeup of this committee at the outset.
Okay, all right. Can we make it clear then, at the beginning of the entire document, that consensus was for unanimous decision, not just majority decision?
Okay, we can do that, but I just want to suggest an edit going back to that particular sentence that you took issue with. So maybe that sentence, that second to last, that says, many committee members were hesitant, we can delete the word many and just say committee members were hesitant to support either of these proposals, period, and get rid of that second clause of that sentence as well.
Yeah, I think that would be
Right,
better.
and that would just fix
Well,
it.
excuse me, can I just say, instead of saying committee members, why don't we just say some committee members? Because if it wasn't full, I think that would be sort of.
Okay, so is everybody okay with the word some?
Well, I think that there's a
I'm
little,
okay with it.
I think
Okay.
the way that this is laid out is a little bit problematic, I guess in absence of the executive summary. Because if the executive summary comes out and says, this is sort of what we did, the group met consensus or found consensus on, I think it's like 1 or 1, 2, 3 or whatever it is, and everything else there was not consensus among the group. I think we obviously need that front and center. And then I didn't have a tremendous amount of time to review this, to be totally honest with you, but I did read through a little bit of it, and some of it, including the paragraph that was just brought up, 4.14. They have an editorial bend, and sometimes it's in favor of a position that my friend Joe might be in favor of, and sometimes the opposite. And I think that maybe we want to take out any kind of editorial language.
Here, here. Agreed.
You
I
know,
think that's really important too, because I think what we try to do, and this is why we are very grateful if you're willing to go back in and really, we try to summarize the conversation. And so if we left people the impression that there was a bend in one direction or another, you guys should definitely chime in and try to neutralize it, because that's not the intent of this report. The intent was just to really go through and summarize the topics, the different vantage points, and that a consensus was or wasn't reached. So where we have more of a slant, definitely. So when we ask for comments to come back on the 18th, we welcome any constructive feedback on how to neutralize it, because that's all we want to do in this report. And to your point, Lev, on the executive summary, I think the goal is to really only talk about, to the extent we have any areas that we have consensus on, and not rehash all of the other topics that were discussed, because I think that, we don't want to leave it as a tally system where you have the majority looks like they're in favor of something or not. We don't really want to go back to that vantage point. It's just, here's what came out of the committee.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, my only concern there, and obviously we can play with this and we'll each give our recommendations. Our charge was to give a recommendation to the legislature and to the governor at the end of the day. A recommendation is going to be that 3 sentences in the executive summary or 6 sentences or whatever it is. And everything else is just sort of, not necessarily what our charge was to present. I understand, and there's value to it, but all of the discussions are public record. I'm not sure that that it's going to be very difficult to encapsulate those in a way that all of us are going to be satisfied, without just sort of stating this issue, no consensus, this issue, no consensus. Once we start to get into trying to record what the conversation was, I think it becomes, first of all, not our charge, second of all, a little bit dangerous and maybe counterproductive, simply because someone can go back, there is a record here. I would probably lean towards a thinner report on the areas where we don't have consensus, so.
And
And I think that's for the committee to discuss. Like, if you don't want all of this in, I think that at least our original proposal for you to consider was to document the tremendous amount of work that you've put into this committee. And if we just went to an executive summary saying, here are our recommendations, and it's like this thin, that it also implies potentially that we didn't take it seriously. But I think that we were trying to give people the understanding of how much involvement this committee had. But if you folks are comfortable taking out of this report the details of the various topics and just say no consensus, this is your report. So I think you should discuss that.
We could add a sentence to the executive summary that simply says, if you think we didn't do enough work, you're mandated to watch all the videos.
But that said, to put a rather fine point as we move from this meeting to the next on what Joe have just said, and I do agree. And I think, and I'll concur with the doctor in terms of that paragraph, I do agree substantively, but I think, again, to put a fine point on it, the sentence just in question, many committee members were hesitant to support either of these proposals. That is true or it's not true. Comma, even though it could help in areas where IME physician shortages exist, that's editorial. And I don't know
So
that...
I can get rid of that. We can get rid of
Okay, and again,
But
we'll
let's
go
just
through
step
it.
back, though, to Lev's suggestion. Do you want all of this commentary in the report or not? I mean, that's your call as far as, the final report goes.
Because we could make it leaner in that way and just say, on this day, this topic was discussed, on this day, this topic was discussed, and then not really put in the nature of those discussions.
I think that there's, I don't mean to dominate this conversation at all, but I think there might be value, the Workers' Comp Board put out a fine piece of work in the initial report, which sort of is the bulk of what we've been discussing, it led our conversation. It wouldn't be inappropriate for that to be, it is already out there, and for that to be an addendum. And so a lot of this becomes unnecessary when that's out there. We based our discussions on this report, it guided us, this is where we went. We can certainly have lists of folks that came in and spoke to us, we can have, tallies if we want, although I don't know that that's 100% necessary. I think we're rehashing a lot of stuff, and I think it's gonna be hard to clean out. It's just going to be difficult to clean it out and make it innocuous, but, we'll all give it a shot, but that's just my 2 cents.
Like anything else, it's just a fine balance between detail and summarization. So you have your first draft here, we can all review it and suggest any sort of editorial changes. But
And I'll
I don't think anyone's going to walk away with it, with every single word being 100%, so we could parse the word could down for the next hour, right? And many, most, right? Is some more than 2, is some 3, right? A couple is 2, some is 3. If we do that, we're never gonna make any progress.
So we'll be
A
thinking the leaner
suggestion
the
that I
better.
might offer that could solve that, but I disagree. Many, all, could, would are very important. Since these discussions have been posted online, we could just put a link or a footnote so that if anybody's interested into what went behind the concept that reached this conclusion, they are free and welcome to go back and look at it, and they can see for themselves without a distillation or position or bias, either unintentional or on purpose, and they can see it as raw material.
Excuse me, can I just say, I think to sort of denude this of any substantive information is not particularly helpful to anybody. I think that I like the idea that there's this summary of each issue and what was discussed, and I think to the extent it could be made neutral, and even there, I'm not entirely sure about that. I mean, we have very little consensus, unanimous consensus, but there are several areas in which there was overwhelming consensus, let's say all but 2 people or 1 person. I'm not sure that it's necessary to, take that out of the mix entirely. I'm not sure, but I do think that it would be important to discuss, include some of the things we discussed at these meetings. I think otherwise it makes us look like we did absolutely nothing. And I think we did quite a lot.
So I feel very strongly, based on the makeup of the group, that we not include the editorialization and that we avoid words like some, most, many, all but one. I also don't think that the tally is appropriate because whether we, if we remove it from the text but still put it at the end, I can go and say, well, look, this is a good idea because most of us agreed, and Lev can take, whatever point that he wants to make and say the same thing. So, I think that the understanding at the outset was unanimity, and we should stick to that.
I agree, and especially since, those of us who happen to be litigators and not as political by profession, I tend not to think about who this is going to, who the recipient will be, and the use of it. And so I agree with everything said, sans that there should be more detail rather than less, and I do agree that the vote tally should be removed.
I actually like Dr. Goldberg's idea. I mean, if you're really interested, hit the hyperlink, rock and roll.
Put the work in we did.
Yeah.
Watch the 14 hour.
All right, I know that there isn't necessarily unanimous consensus on this, so, but we do have to make a decision, right? Because this report has to be written one way or another, whether it's 5 pages, 10 pages, or the existing 30-something. So, yeah, I'm not sure where to take this. Well, the report itself is only.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Without
really
the
part
appendix.
four.
It's only 20 pages
It's
without
really
the
part
appendix.
four, I think, that's really
Yeah.
gonna be the discussion topic. I mean, we can bring more information on the utilization study if people want. We have a hyperlink in here to that report. We could, summarize a little bit of it in here. So the question really is, I understand the desire on pages 17 and 18 to just take out the tally sheet, because I hear the concerns that it somehow implies a majority, rules kind of concept. So, we can certainly remove that. But looking at, let's just say, section 4.1, the volume and distribution and availability. So there were a lot of discussions about how many and how many should they do, should there be topic, daily limits, things like that. So I just want to get a sense of what people are thinking as far as like the volume, distribution, and availability of providers. Do we want to just say that this was discussed and no consensus was really reached? Is that like, and then here is the link to the day we discussed it? Is that what I'm hearing? Is like kind of the desired?
I don't support go watch the videotape.
Okay.
I mean, to be useful to the user of this, there has to be some summarization to give that person an understanding. And certainly if they want an even deeper understanding, then they can go watch the videotape. But, roll the tape to me is not the solution to being able to distill down the work.
Well, it's distilled down here in the list on 17 if you remove the tallies, right? I mean, their topics are distilled down. It doesn't have to have numbers. Volume, distribution of IME.
Well, let me just go back to 4.1, right? So
Yep.
you're reporting on the facts that were captured, right? So distilling it down and reporting on that, for example, in this is certainly acceptable and I think appropriate, right? But telling the reader, go, you read the survey yourself and pull the numbers together for in your own mind, there's benefit here to report on certain things.
So what if what we did was, staying with 4.1 and subsection 1, day caps, right? That first half of that paragraph could stay, right? Because it really helps the reader understand what are you talking about, day caps? Like, what does that even mean? So what does the topic itself mean? What were we delving into? And then maybe we can just not necessarily summarize the discussion itself. Like, instead of saying one of the physicians, like omit that part. Does that make sense? But actually summarizing the topic in greater detail and maybe not any of what transpired during the
Well, I
discussion.
think
I don't know.
what I was saying before is I think that you could say the group discussed day caps, there was no
Right.
consensus on action. Annual minimums, there was no consensus on action. Allowing telemedicine, there was no consensus on action, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, because that will do, you can have that little intro, here is the topic, here are the
Then have bullet
specifics
points.
that we discussed, and there was no consensus. And then you're basically distilling the chart and the paragraphs. And I think that it is a fair representation of sort of what the outcome was, without editorial and without, it becoming a tool for anything other than, this is the work we put in, this is what we have here, and the result thereof. I don't think that there's a harm in
So I
using
think,
the headings.
right, so like some people will read this and have read this, and from what I'm hearing is there's some overly editorializing, I'm not sure, of some of the comments. So, we can redline the comments that you think are tread beyond kind of factual into editorialization of the meeting, and then we can work towards that.
So middle of the road robustness.
Yes.
So we'll
Neutral.
So
just redline
what I
it,
was
guess.
suggesting is that you keep the detail about the topic itself,
Yeah.
right? So if you, again, you take that paragraph as our example, you're keeping the first
As if you're not
few
gonna want to know this
sentences,
anyway.
and then you just stop short of saying, one of the physicians thought X, and one of the,
All right, so I think we would look to the committee to basically bracket out, or, if there are different ways you want it summarized, we'll take the feedback back and try to distill it as briefly as possible. And, where there's no consensus, just simply state, and if there's consensus, I don't know that we literally have a consensus. I know topics are discussed today, but I think that would kind of be the area maybe that we would try to flesh out for the report.
So is there any value to creating, I don't mean to say it like this, but a subcommittee that can sit down with folks at the board? My concern is, we're all gonna give you 8 different versions of, and then you're gonna have this monumental task, and then we're gonna come back and we're not gonna agree again. But if there were a group of 3 or 4, whatever it is, that had another meeting and we sat down and hashed it out together, it may be more productive, it may be quicker, and we may be able
Sure.
to do this in more time. I don't really
We'd
wanna
be happy
volunteer,
to do
but,
we're hoping
We
next.
may have trouble agreeing on who should serve it.
I understand.
I think
get it.
everyone would want to serve on this.
Nobody wants to.
I feel, it's gonna be a really difficult task if you're getting 8, or I don't know how many of us are, 8 versions of this, and then, but maybe the rest of the people don't wanna give that power to a subcommittee. I'm willing to give it away.
Are we able to have a Google Doc distributed to everyone so that if we have an opinion, we can redline it or add language? It would be identified by whomever it is who's contributing it. If I were to see a message by Lev that I liked, I can say, agree with Lev, and then put my initial on it. Or say, I propose an alternative, and then would list that. So this way, we have a dynamic document which is going back and forth. We can see people weighing in on what we suggested, and perhaps improving them. Certainly, if I'm suggesting it will be improved upon. And we can go from there, and then I have a lot of respect for the board, and then we have a cutoff date. The board will have those comments, and we'll be able to clean the document up from that. There'll be some chatter on it, but the chatter would be good. If we identify things that are felt to be editorial, and we can pull it. Like for this one, I really like some of this, but we blend in within the feedback from the injured workers, which we like. But I would love for the reader to see that we say that 2.5 provided 72%, but I'd like to show that 1.2 presented only 3% of the IME, something like that, so people can understand what the issue is. This is going towards it, but one more sentence there, somebody else is going to have another suggestion. But if we had this as a free-flowing document and we can work from it, I think it's great. A problem with having a PDF is we're then going to be sending you scratch paper, and that's going to be tough. If we have something that we can, either in Word or a shared document, structurally speaking, we can do it.
So let me make a suggestion, and certainly feel free to, I worry about the Google Docs with not version control, but like multiple people in and out of a document, and just the logistics of it. So if we could certainly send everybody a Word version, and if we could agree that the structure is okay, maybe what we could ask people to do is to take, let's say like 4.1, number 1, and just say, here's my suggested language. And then, so we'll have everybody's version of what they think 4.1 should say. We can just, and take a look at it, and if we are hitting what seems to be a consensus, we can give you the different versions, and then a recommendation based on what we saw, and you can agree to accept or reject. Does that help you? I mean, it kind of gives you, I think, Dr. Goldberg, like what you're looking for is like what other people's feedback is. So we could flip that back to you guys pretty quickly. It's just, here's the 5 different versions of 4.1. This theme seemed to be the winner, so we would propose that as the recommendation, and people could agree or disagree. It's a starting point. Again, you guys have to look at it and make, the final determination. We're just trying to figure out the logistics that will work best and the easiest for all of the group.
Mary Beth, so you don't get 19 different versions. Perhaps if you arbitrarily clump 3 or 4 of us together, so that whoever they are, random distribution, we would give you one document, so then we would reduce that workload by a third. And this way, let us have the conversations amongst ourselves, and then I believe that you're going to have very similar documents from the 3 or 4 groups that are putting them out there. Because I like your idea. For you to have 19 is a lot, but for you to have 3 you can work with.
That's a good point. We're happy to turn you guys loose on subcommittees. It's entirely up to you guys. I mean, we can facilitate if you want. We can set those up.
Does anyone else like
I
that
would-
idea?
I mean, I appreciate the innovative ideas about how to handle this, but I would prefer to provide my own input.
I'd like to see a Word document that I can redline and give
Sure.
you my comments.
I think that would be
Okay.
helpful.
I was gonna
yeah.
ask.
All right, so
If we had
let's
it in
do
Word
that.
format,
Yeah.
we could do
Is
track
it-
changes.
Okay.
So let's do that. We'll take your, I think just to try to boil it down, if we can get to a revised, and we'll just focus on, feel free to send us all your comments on the other sections, but I think, really what we're talking about is this section 4. So if you want to send us back your marked up versions, to the extent there's like similar themes, like we're going to take out these 4 sentences across the board, we can do that, and then there's probably going to be some other tinkering. But maybe, my concern is just timing. So this is October, we're going to give you back a marked up version by November 1st. And do we want to set up a time, before the next meeting to do one more iteration of it? Or do you want to just see how the next meeting goes, and then maybe it's weekly meetings till we hit December 31st? I just know we're running out of time. There's still going to be some editing that has to happen. And I just want to understand for you folks, what works best for you as far as getting new iterations of this moving.
I think just get us a document, all of us, a Word document within the week. We'll get it back to you within the week, and that's it. And we'll have it ready by the next meeting.
Okay.
And not to step on anyone's toes, but very often, and again, the bailiwick of these folks, but if you look at a New York State bill drafting exercise, there's kind of a uniform way of doing that. If you want to remove language or add it, if nobody objects to perhaps, the bracket, the underline, the little instruction up top, so we're at least all
Sure.
able to read this thing and know what each other is saying. 'Cause
Oh,
it's
I didn't
much-
think we were going to share our versions. I thought the board was going to get our versions and then synthesize the comments.
But I think just for us to, I think
Oh,
it
for
was
you-
simple
oh,
for
for
us to
what
be
you
able to
send
see
back
what's
to
been
us.
bracketed.
Yeah, just, so that, if you just rewrite a paragraph, it's much harder to say, all right, we took this out, we added this in, versus looking at, just a
You're saying
row.
for the next version of this, keep this intact,
I'm
but
saying,
show what's been added or deleted?
no, I'm saying for your personal comments when they go back to the board, and it's maybe not necessary if we're not all going to be looking at them, but when you strike language from a bill, you leave the verbiage in there, but you denote it in a
You
certain
show
way.
the track changes,
Right.
basically.
And when you add to it as well, and so everyone will see, Justin Teff wanted this sentence out, but wanted this sentence added, and there's, it might, I don't know. It's just-
I would think it was.
Isn't that
You're-
using
you're-
track changes on Word?
Yeah, so that's what I
He's
I'm
saying
not-
I understand
keep
what
it
you're saying.
visible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's saying to keep it
Technological.
visible so that we could see what
Okay.
that change
So either
was.
bracket it
Yeah.
out and underline new text, or do track changes. I think
Okay.
we can work with either one.
Okay.
All right.
Does that work
Thanks.
for people? Okay. So right after today's meeting, we'll send out the Word version of this document. And if folks could get back to us by next Friday, the 18th, their track change or bracketed version, then we'll try to flip to you by November 1st, kind of the consolidated editorial changes. And again, please feel free to do the other sections as well, but I think the majority of what we're going to be having to work on in the next meeting is going to be section 4. And then we'll roll it all up. And that'll give us 2 weeks to kind of digest before our next official meeting. And depending on how close we are, we'll figure out if we need to do shorter, durations in between.
Okay, let's see.
All right, so next on the agenda, we had a demo of the portal, potential portal.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
Stephanie. One
yep.
thing that we didn't get
Sure.
to was the appendices, just to make sure that everyone is okay with this as well. So after sections 4 and 5, we just want you to note and also take a look at what the proposed appendices will be. So we're gonna be putting in, obviously, the statute, regulation, but also we had proposed putting in your survey responses. I believe they're here somewhere as well.
So
We're gonna be attaching the utilization study, and I think we were gonna be putting in, yes, the questionnaire. Your, member questionnaire responses. So we just wanted to make a note of that and make sure everybody was okay with that as well, since we've discussed that.
Does submitting
So-
that, I'm sorry. Is
ahead.
it tantamount to putting the vote list in there, though? The actual responses to the questionnaires?
So you're saying you wouldn't want the responses in there?
I think that's it's not that much difference than leaving the vote tally in there. It's two forms of the same thing.
It's a little different. It's a little thicker.
I think to maintain consistency, we should leave it out. I mean, you can, it's a matter of, providing the information in the text, or providing it on the chart, or providing it in a, a more difficult to synthesize version. But in my mind, it still gets across the same point, that X many decided this was good, and X many decided that was good. I think the agreement was unanimity, or the understanding.
I just
was
want to
unanimity.
point out that that would be
Will
a
all the-
change, because we had discussed putting it in when we asked you for these responses of the questionnaire.
So all of the handouts that we've had, is that going to become part of the final?
Yeah, we have it on
report?
here as appendix.
It's a link to
3.
our website
Okay.
that has
All
all
the
of the
materials.
videos.
So I mean, the
all
handouts, that
handouts.
was a handout however many meetings ago, right?
The
blank
The
one.
blank one.
So you're saying just put in the blank one and not necessarily,
The results.
The questions without the answers.
Yeah.
To-
okay,
to,
Mindy had a comment, go ahead, Mindy.
Yeah, we've been meeting month after month trying to work through the fact that the legislature has identified, whether it was the legislature or by advice of some other party, that this is an issue. We've spent months working on this, and now it's like nobody wants to put in what their thoughts, feelings, and ideas are. I don't understand what we're so afraid of, that we don't want to be, you answered the questionnaires, you had some thought about it. It seems to me that the legislators are entitled or would be happy to see what transpired at these meetings and why we've come to essentially consensus on maybe one item. I don't think that what are we afraid of putting out our ideas out on the table for?
I'm not necessarily personally afraid of voicing my ideas, and I would hope everyone that's spent the last 18 months, or however many months we've been here, would realize that. I'm concerned with what Joe and Liv have said, that outside of this forum, that can be suggestive to other parties that, well, of something that was not necessarily intended by this committee. Again, we've come to consensus on some areas, we haven't. I'm not a legislator, but I imagine you can talk about things for an entire legislative session and come to no consensus. In fact, I watch it on TV. And so I don't view this committee as having not achieved its objective by not giving it a thoroughly and horrifyingly detailed report. Some problem areas were identified. A committee of very reputable and intelligent people met, considered them, came to some areas of consensus and did not on others, and we are reporting back to the legislature as we were directed to do, without necessarily giving someone the ability to go and say, well, Justin Teff thinks this is a good idea, so maybe we should. Well, no, if the rest of the committee members thought Justin Teff's idea was terrible, then it should not be suggested that that was a good idea, or that any other member of the committee agreed. And I realize an argument could be made that simply including my questionnaire is not 100% going to do that. But then I would also look at this the other way, which is include all those questionnaires and you've bulked up this report by hundreds of pages before you even get past the substance of it. And so I think I maintain my position that anyone, and as said, we're not going to flatly and in some disrespectful way say, oh, you want to see what happened, watch the video. But it is all on video, and that's why we have the open meetings law. And well, that's it.
I'm very practical. My way of looking at this is completely practical, Mindy, and that is there's going to be a very small handful of people, staffers in the legislature and in the governor's office, who are going to go through all of this material, and they're going to go through all the videos, and they're going to have the full picture. But what I'm more concerned about is everybody else in the legislature that it's going to give this an incredibly cursory review and is going to see, okay, 7 out of 7, 4 and 2 against whatever it was, telemedicine or whatever. That's basically that's a yes. And the people doing the deep dive, we're going to do the work. They're going to be the staffers that are going to be helping make decisions. But as far as the general body, you don't want to create sway or bias on something that we were looking for unanimity when there simply isn't. And that's my concern. It's not really hiding anything. The information's there, but I want someone that is doing the work of looking at the information. Someone that's going to do the deep dig. That's fine, and everybody else should understand that we only had unanimity on these issues.
So, listen, I certainly defer to the group on this. I don't have any stake in it. I just feel that we spoke about a lot of important things. I hear your concerns, but it seems to me a shame that we have not, this was an important issue and we haven't been able to, sort of move the dial at all in the best interests of the injured workers and the state of New York. But I'm with you if that's what you want.
I'm not sure, it must have been my understanding from the beginning that we needed unanimous decision to recommend anything. If you get more than 2 people in a room, you never have unanimous decisions. So I don't know if we're really recommending anything.
We're about to find out. I think we have a few topics on the list that we might be close on. But so far, we haven't identified anything that we have unanimous decisions on. But we have a couple that have a little bit of life left.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on those. Stephanie's going to touch on those. But before we leave this topic, I just want to make sure everyone's okay with leaving off the questionnaires, even though we had discussed previously that they would be included. So this would be a change. I just want everybody to know that. Everyone's okay with that? Leaving them off?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to leave them in.
It's, the challenge is that the questionnaire results aren't captured in the videotape. So what other source would a user of this report have to get that level of detail?
And they were meant to be a summary of, your point of view on the respective topics in your own words, so that we didn't have to characterize.
If someone just takes a cursory view and doesn't have time to look in depth, all they're going to see is no consensus was reached on anything. And I don't think that's really what we've discussed or come to after the past 10 months of discussions. That I think we've had some good discussions and drawn some of our own conclusions, which are not brought out in our conclusions of this report.
But at the end of the day, we only had unanimity on what we had unanimity on.
And whether we accomplished anything or not, what's the relevance of what Justin Teff happened to think about the topic?
A lot.
Oh, thank you. Goodness.
I mean, you can debate in the legislature for weeks on any given bill and it never goes to a vote or it doesn't get passed. That doesn't mean work wasn't done. This is going to reflect what it's supposed to reflect, which is that consensus was met here or not.
Well, don't you think, though, the ideas and suggestions that came out of this committee, whether or not there was full agreement on them, may be valid or worthwhile for somebody, even people taking the deep dive into it to see what was involved?
Yes, I do, and I think that you have an opportunity to do that in the text. I mean, my concern is providing the vote tally, right? We have a group here that, like I said, from the beginning, the understanding was unanimity. I also touched on earlier the makeup of the group. We didn't object to the makeup of the group at the outset because of the unanimity requirement or agreement. The fact that the questionnaires were to be shared at the outset or when they were presented to us escaped me. I would have raised this issue then, but.
We discussed it and about whether or not you'd want to put your name on something. This was your opportunity to do so. You guys were given time.
I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
My memory, though, was that it was in the context of sharing within the group.
Okay, you can agree.
So I would have, like I said, if it was clear to me then that this was going to be a tally or could be used for a tally, I would have raised the objection then.
Well, the tally is a different thing. I'm talking about the questionnaire now. I think we all agree that the tally, if no one wants it in, it doesn't have to stay in. I was asking about the questionnaire itself, where you guys took the time to give us your summaries on each topic, your comments, and we discussed that those would be part of this report. That actually, that would make up the majority of the report so that we didn't have to characterize and summarize your respective opinions, so that you had an opportunity to put in your own opinions in your own words. And you went back and spoke to, your colleagues, other stakeholders, came back and gave us your summaries of those topics with the intent that they would live in this report.
I think that we have an opportunity to do that, provide that whoever feels strongly about whichever issue can add it into the text. My concern with adding the questionnaires is that somebody's going to go through where, we've talked about not using this as a tool to say, well, the majority or most or, what's the difference between that, whether that's information is in the text, in the tally sheet, or on the questionnaire responses?
And
There's a big difference. One is our characterization of that, right? Our summarizing, and the other is your own words. So that's the difference there.
Maybe.
I get it if you guys don't want to put it in. I just want you to understand.
I'm happy to share my own words.
The understanding was something different.
I'm happy to share my own words. I stand by everything that I wrote, everything that I've said, right? That I haven't bit my tongue at all during these meetings. But the idea that somebody's going to distill from that a vote on this issue or a vote on that issue, or can discern that a majority, suggested this or that is troubling to me.
And that's it. Anyone can go through the questionnaires and make the tally.
And the reason why it's troubling for me is because of the makeup of the committee. We have one labor rep, one injured worker attorney rep. We have 3 doctors, one of whom my understanding is exclusively treats injured workers. And then everybody else, we have 2 self-insured employer reps, we have 2 insurance reps, we have 2 doctors who, as wonderful as they are, and as much as I agree with them on many issues, perform IMEs. So it's a little bit lopsided when you consider the tally, and that's my concern.
Can I make a suggestion? What about putting forth the questionnaires without in other words, just with people's individual comments without necessarily putting in whether they thought something was a good or a bad idea? Because, for instance, there were certain things that I put in, well, this would be okay, but, and with exception of additional thoughts, why would that be more acceptable to you, Joe?
I think that we still get to the point where someone's going to go through and be able to make the tally. I mean, when I read through the text of this, there were points that I made in some of these meetings and on the questionnaire that I didn't see reflected in here, and quite honestly, I plan to request that they be included. This was one of the suggestions. So if there's something that you feel should be included, I would encourage you to include it in your draft of the text.
David.
So let me just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, maybe open meetings law is not your expertise, but where do our responses to the survey fall vis-a-vis open meetings law?
They can clearly be foiled.
They can clearly be foiled, there's no question about that, but I mean.
Well, the open meetings law is just access to the meeting by the public.
Right, but
Not
all
to
documents.
Documents
that-
themselves.
but-
Patrick, you can correct me if I'm mistaken, but, yeah.
So they're
It's not
clearly-
a document law, the open meetings law.
Right, but they're clearly foilable.
Right.
They're currently not on the website though,
No.
right?
As part of the report, we are gonna put in a link, page 3 of 20. There'll be a link there with the open meetings law language to the meetings themselves.
Table it for the immediate point in time and come back to it?
Yeah, I mean, that decision doesn't have to be made today. We can, we can have people go back, look at their respective comments and see, we'll take a vote at the next meeting about whether, it's an appendices, so it's not like it has to be hashed out today. We have till the end to decide if it's in or it's
It's not
out.
necessarily the attribution to an individual, it sounds like it's more of the ability to tally.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with Joe on a lot of this, in fact, and my only hesitation is if they're public documents and they're foilable, they're public documents and they're foilable, maybe a link to it. I always have a grand hesitation of putting roadblocks on something that's a public document. I mean, listen, I foiled plenty of times, and if someone will do it if they want this, but that's my only hesitation. I mean, I think the tally is right in your face, and I think that your point is 1,000% correct. I think the survey stuff, I hear what you're saying. I'm not really disagreeing with you. I just hesitate to make it non-accessible, period, without sort of going through the machinations of a FOIL request. But we can table it for now. But I mean, if you have there might be somewhere we can go to make it work for you. But I don't know.
Maybe.
It's the FOIL request thing that.
Okay. All right, thank you guys. So now, Mary Beth will give a brief description of the portal and how it might be able to help.
So you may recall at the last meeting, there was some discussion about forms and consolidating forms and making them a little bit easier. We have attachment A, attachment B. And so we talked about maybe the portal would fix some of this concern. And I think it kind of will lead into some of our other discussions, the topics that are kind of still open for the committee to consider. So we just wanted to give you a sense of what this portal is going to look like and how it's going to work. So this is the medical portal landing page. It's really the gateway for people to, to get information and allow them to interact with the board. And it has 3 different cards in it. So the medical provider page, the card is used to access the authorization request process and associated required trainings. So you'll see, they would just go in there, click on the training, and be able to take whatever trainings they would need to take.
Beth, just because people may not be familiar, when we say authorization in this context, we mean to become an authorized provider, as opposed to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
don't, I
Yes,
think
correct.
that's,
That's a
people
good
are going to
clarification.
see the word authorization twice. And
Right, so the expanded provider, we're doing all of our authorizations through the portal, so they can come in and ask to be an authorized board provider right now. It allows them to go in and update their registration information, and you can just see kind of like the laundry list of things that they can look at and deal with online right away. The second card is the treatment card. So this is typically going to be for things like the formulary of prior authorization. Ultimately, we'll have things like this C4 authorization, the MG2 prior auth request, and then we'll have the DME prior authorization request. So all of that stuff will be able to be accessed through here to click on and get the form you need to be able to fill out and ask for whatever treatment you're looking for. And then the last tab is the billing. So it's going to allow you for information on like our fee schedule and the electronic forms when we get to that point, like CMS 1500. So all of the tools that a provider will need in the system, they can kind of come through here and access. So the goal of this is and we're trying to give you a sense of what the IME would look like. So if a carrier, let's say, wants to do an IME, they can go in and do a search. So they're going to go in and they're going to enter in the case number, the claims administration number, if that's a field that they have instead of their own, the board case number. And then like a couple of other key pieces of information, like the date of injury, the last four of social, date of birth, last name. So they'll put in one of, the box 1 and 2 in the box 2. And when they hit search, it should come back to them with information about that particular case. So you'll say it's established for, and you'll be able to see what sites they've been established for. So this will give them the basic information, they have the right case number. And then the next thing that will happen is that it'll populate itself into the form. So I know there's been a lot of concern about the cumbersome forms we have, and how do I need to know if I need attachment A or attachment B? And what this is really kind of designed to do is, give them a quick flood of information. So in this case, this is just kind of like the formulary piece of it, but it'll give you all the necessary information and really just leave you openings for the key pieces of information that you're going to need to fill out. So if this is an iterative process for an IME, if it's going to be a schedule loss of use, there's a particular form that you have to fill out, but you won't need to know which one. By clicking the box, it'll kind of automatically populate the pieces you're going to have to answer. So I think there were some concerns about, is a provider in the system like burdened by so much paperwork, and I think this will kind of help ease the burden. Only the relevant fields that they have to fill out will come up on the screen for them to fill out. They won't have to worry about the other attachments that don't apply, that kind of thing. So then, again, they'll be able to come in, and this is really tied more to the formulary piece, but you're going to be able to go in and put in or upload potentially your medical information, your narratives and things that will come into the system and allow you to fill out the necessary information, and then you'll hit submit. And it's just going to be, the way this is envisioned is, depending on who you are in the system, your party of interest will dictate where that form goes. So the carrier, let's say for an IME form, will fill out the request for it, and depending on who they designate, they'll send it to the IME entity or directly to the provider. They'll have to fill out their piece of information, and depending on the next steps, and I think, Stephanie, we have on the next page kind of that process flow that we talked about with the exams. So depending on what role you play in the system, that document will just automatically move back and forth in the system by just hitting submit. Like today, when you think about, we have issues about asking for medical treatment, and if you don't have the right fax number, it could be like, kicked out because you didn't put the right fax number in, and that all goes away in this new system. It'll automatically dictate based on who the system tells them is the next party that has to get this form, and then based on parties of interest in the system, they'll all get copies. So I know we talked a little bit, and we'll talk again today, about allowing these documents to be uploaded in the system. Do you need to send same day, same manner? This system can be designed so that you can click off in the system if you want a hard copy or a paper copy or both. The system would automatically take care of all that for you, and it would allow a copy to come in through and be uploaded directly into the claim file, so it's there for everybody to see. So I just wanted to give you kind of a sense of the way we envision it working in the new system, just so as we get into today's conversations about, consolidating forms and same day, same manner and uploading into the system, all of those things we think can be addressed through the new portal model. So, we're happy to answer questions. It's kind of an envisioned environment, but it's mirrored off of the way we're going to work on the formulary prior auth right now.
What kind of time frame are we looking at here, Deb?
Well, the formulary is the first thing to go up. It'll go up this year. The C4OS and MG2s are expected to go in 2020. So we were expecting it to go in sometime, potentially late 2020. I think it depends on this committee. If we decide that that's a priority, we can certainly look at where it falls into the timing, or whether we bring in, additional resources to get this up and running like on a parallel track. So I think we would leave that to this group. If you talked about it in the context, let's say, of same day, same manner, which is kind of where we thought it would play into the process. If people are comfortable that same day, same manner could be dealt with through this process, and we could eliminate, some of the delays in the system because the paperwork's, being loaded into the system, it's getting scanned in or whatever, that we could put that on a fast track and try to get that done sooner rather than later. So I think we wanted to kind of have that conversation, talk about that exists as a potential to solve some of the problems, and if it's something that we can reach consensus on, we can move it to the front burner, priorities to get this electronic process set up. It's just going to require a little, of juggling on our end.
So this is to work, it's focused on both the IME process as well as the C4 auth process and G2 process and the HIPAA 1500s and the narrative.
Well,
Is
this
all part of it?
Well, they're all like separate projects, right? So we're about to roll out the formulary prior authorization, which kind of works like this. So the doctor will come in, they'll flood in through the case search all the relevant information, but the doctor will put in all of their relevant pieces, like why do I need a different medication? And and when you hit submit, that doctor doesn't need to worry about where it's going. The system will know who has to get it next. But they'll have the dashboard to kind of track what's still outstanding for them. So we're thinking the IME process could kind of work the same way. The carrier would fill out their request, it would go to whoever the carrier is designated as either the IME entity or the provider, the doctor themselves, and then, the process will flow from there. So the question that we wanted to talk to at some point today is, does that type of flow eliminate some of the concerns in the same day, same manner? So we just wanted to kind of walk you through the envisioned environment for this, see if it eliminates some of the concerns, or if there are things that we could do to tweak it to eliminate the concerns. And if we get consensus on same day, same manner, then we would potentially move that electronic flow more to the front end of our development pieces so that it would be available sooner rather than later. But again, that's a legislative change, so we would need to, we wouldn't need to do that until the legislation was passed, but we could start to plan for it. So there's just a number of, steps involved in getting something like that set up.
Right, so same day, same manner, the issue is the fact that often it's one piece of that doesn't happen, that's a problem, so that would eliminate that piece of it. And the time frame of being 10 days, I think this would also, although I still would love to see an extra couple of days in there, because I think it's a little tight sometimes. But that, I think, a lot of that would be solved by this system as well, so.
Right, so I don't want to jump into that conversation yet. I mean, Stephanie's got like a laundry list of topics to go through, but we just want to give you kind of a visual of how this could work. So as we get into things like training, like I showed you on the portal landing page, there's a link to click on for training. All the relevant pieces of training materials would be at that link. You could go on and do all of the modules you need to do, and then the system would track to make sure everybody took it. So again, I just want to make sure you had a sense of where the portal was going to be and what aspects of it would cover before we delved into kind of these last issues that are on the table. So just getting a sense of time, it's 1 o'clock, we have till 3. We have, how many topics, Stephanie?
We have 10.
Okay.
And so we're about 15 minutes behind right now.
Right. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Stephanie, and then, if we want to come back to the portal as we go into these discussions, we're happy to jump back to those slides and kind of give you more of an explanation, but we just want to give you a quick overview.
Okay, so as I mentioned, there's 10 topics to be discussed today. Those are on the screen now. These topics were either tabled at the last meeting, or there was a request to modify the proposal at the last meeting. Generally, we have education and training, timing issues, injured worker experience, and then 2 others, which is allowing access for medical providers to e-case medical records, as well as at the last meeting, the Inspector General's office was there and gave a presentation on fraud, and we indicated that we would talk about fraud at this meeting if you have any recommendations that are in that area. We have about 7 or 8 minutes per topic.
So just before we go any further, one of the topics that I don't see here, and maybe it was because it was foreclosed at an earlier meeting, was the idea of putting some type of limitations or a unified form for the IMEs to present to the injured workers when they come in, like a questionnaire form. I know that we've talked about it a few times, and like I said, my memory isn't that it was foreclosed, but if it was,
It was not.
please let me know.
It was not.
It absolutely was not.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 6 minutes. Okay, education and training. As you know, we've discussed the role of continuing education and training for IME providers. At least to me, there appears that there is general support that the board should be providing directly or through a vendor or entity for continuing education and training on key topics within a specialty as related to workers' comp. As a reminder, very few states require education and training for IME providers. Handout 1 shows the 6 states that do, including California, Colorado, Oregon, Tennessee, Texas, and Washington. During the last discussion on this topic, and I hate to say many or most or some, but some agreed that training should be offered to providers at no cost to acquaint providers with the IME system. It was also noticed that with an imposition of mandatory training, that this requirement could exacerbate the shortage of IMEs, especially in upstate areas. So that sort of tees up the conversation on education and training. I'll turn it over to you guys to decide if there is a proposal. And we do have on the questionnaire, the revised proposal is to require the board to develop and deliver continuing education on the IME process at a minimum of 2 hours of training every 2 years. IME providers will receive CME credit for their participation.
I mean, my understanding from the last discussion was the medical providers have to have a certain number of CME training hours anyway. And if the board made sure that the training had the CME credits attached to it, does that alleviate the concerns, or are people more supportive of having minimum requirements for training for workers' comp purposes, or do they not want any training specific to workers' comp?
It seems like a fair trade to me.
I would probably defer to the doctors on the panel on this point. My recollection is that when I first saw the questionnaire, I disagreed with mandatory training and was surprised during our discussion to learn that almost everybody else agreed, and I changed my vote on that. So I thought I was the only outlier, and when I changed my vote, we had consensus, unanimous consensus on that point.
That might still be the case.
Does someone?
I thought Dr. Goldberg did not like the idea of the mandatory training.
I don't like mandatory unless the physician is being paid for his time. If it's available and optional and CME is awarded, and that would give us an opportunity to collect data and within a year or two, see what impact it has. Do we have more IME availability in a given part of the state? What has been the deemed quality of the IME? And then come back to this group or to another group that the board may convene. To mandate something without any evidence for, I feel, is a risk. And I would rather see it, which goes right back to what we heard about the presentation that Mary Beth said a few minutes ago. Yes, I love the idea, same manner, same fashion, but if you run it piecemeal and put just pharmacy up, it becomes cumbersome. Well, this too becomes cumbersome. If it's optional and we have data, I believe we could support it. Without it, unless you're paying the doctor for his time, why would that person do it? CME is not enough of an attraction in my mind. Let's see what the other doctors say.
Well, my opinion is CME really encourages doctors to do it. We're required now for board certification to have a certain number of CMEs annually or every 10 years, depending on your specialty. So for me, this would be a great idea. The idea of only 2 hours every 2 years, I think, is reasonable. The only thing I would request is similar to what workers' comp did for the other training. Make sure it's web-based so we can do it at our time on our convenience, and that it's easy for everyone to access. But other than that, I think it's a great idea.
I think I'm agreeing with Dr. Weinstein also. I think we need to have this type of training. It's only 2 hours every 2 years. It's a good refresher course for any physicians that wants to do an IME, and especially for the new ones that are just starting off to do IMEs. It's a good educational piece, I think. So.
And so long as it's optional, right?
That's what I'm going back to. I didn't hear either Dr. Weinstein or my other colleague next to him say whether or not it should be mandated or optional.
That's why I said that. I just wanted to get there.
Well, my thought is it should be mandatory. And I just feel if you're going to be doing IMEs, you can give up 2 hours of your time to do a mandatory course.
For me, since I really don't do IMEs as often, but I think mandatory would make more sense, because if you're going to be doing IMEs, you should be trained to do them at the appropriate way and able to document appropriately for each case.
Would there be a value in having these to be open for physicians who are not currently authorized to do IMEs, and perhaps the free CME brings a few people in and maybe entices more physicians into the system, which is sort of an underlying need?
That's a great question.
Interesting.
That's a great question. The CME needs is, people look on the internet to try and find CMEs. I find a fair number through the AMA and through MISNI, which is a great resource. Workers' comp also, 3 years ago when it was offered, I think a lot of people did it, and I'm not sure how many doctors did and how many came into the workers' comp system just because CMEs were available for free.
And we can certainly make it available to anybody who wants to take it. I guess the question is, so we could say the board should develop CME training. So the question is it mandatory for authorized IME providers and optional for others? Is that?
That makes sense.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, I'm gonna ask if we have consensus on the board must develop the CME training. Every 2 years, they have to have 2 hours of CME training if you're authorized as an IME provider, and they'll make it available for all other providers, if they choose to take it.
And online.
And online, okay. Okay, any opposition to that recommendation? We have our first official consensus?
I abstain.
Thank you.
Consensus among the voting members.
Sounds like consensus if he's
Okay, I don't,
abstaining right now.
seeing and hearing no
Do you
objections.
have Rogers in the audience by
Okay.
chance?
All right. Do we need it in 7 minutes?
Almost. We
Okay.
may be on a roll, Mary Beth, let's just keep
Okay.
it going.
Kind of consensus, yeah.
So the next is end same day, same manner. As you know, currently, all IME forms must be sent on the same day in the same manner, as required by Workers' Comp Law 137(1)A. We've discussed the feasibility of allowing an IME provider or entity to upload the report to the board electronically. You just saw a demo of how it could potentially be used. And to serve the parties in differing manners by paper, mail to the claimant, and electronic means to others if so desired. Just saw the demo. So in the discussion, some agree that having the IME reports uploaded to a board portal, the same day, same manner problem could be alleviated. There's been discussion that it could help expedite the entire IME process and to make the files accessible to all parties with the added option of allowing paper copies to the claimant. Some did express caution on the functional merits of an untested portal system. So this conversation, this topic is whether or not there is support for ending same day, same manner, possibly through the use of the portal, a portal.
So I know there was some discussion in prior meetings about always making sure that the injured worker gets a hard copy, some questions about whether their attorneys want a hard copy. And I think at least the discussions I've had with the IT folks is that you could potentially put like the checkbox in, do you want, again, not the injured worker, but for everyone else, you can do, electronic copy or paper copy or both. So that would be, either instantaneous if you took the electronic, or hard copy we put in the mail on that same day.
Is there an opportunity for the injured worker to also get an electronic copy?
Yeah, we could certainly make that available. I guess the question, I thought the question was they wanted to make sure they always got one, but if they want to choose, we could certainly build that functionality in.
So in my mind, and the previous conversation isn't totally fresh in my mind, but I do want to make sure that they get a paper copy. But
So-
can they also opt in to an electronic copy?
I'm sure we can build that functionality in. So they would automatically get paper with the option to get electronic. Do you want to give them the option to opt out of paper, though?
I'm really hesitant
Okay.
to do that. I want to add notice, not
Okay.
potentially take it away. The difference, and I think that one of the things that escapes a lot of us who do this every day is that the difference is there's no infrastructure at an injured worker's home, right, to take and process documents and properly and timely, as opposed to a legal office or an insurance carrier or an employer, or even a union. So I would be hesitant to do anything that would take away their opportunities for notice.
Can I just ask a question?
Their own option, though.
So if somebody is a represented injured worker, someone is an attorney, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, I mean, it's hard, but I find personally, in my personal life, getting a lot of paper in my house, which is probably more of a disaster than my office, is actually difficult. If that person is represented, is there an absolute benefit to there being paper? If the attorney is receiving it, arguably their attorney will present them with the reason I'm asking, Joe, and fundamentally I hear what you're saying, I'm not in disagreement. My concern is that, if we create a system that's easier, that's more streamlined, that's cheaper, but there's a standout, right? But you've got to, in this case, mail. There's going to be situations where it doesn't get mailed, right? There's going to be mess ups. It's just going to happen because everything was sent through the portal, but somehow the administrative assistant failed to mail that. In cases where someone's not represented, I fully understand what you're saying, and I don't see a workaround. But I don't want to create a new opportunity for a mistake made by an IME company, by a doctor's office, by an attorney, or whomever, an insurance company or an employer, where it might not be necessary. And in the event that and you guys can speak to this better than I can, it's going to Justin, is it getting to his client? So that's...
I would like the hard copy going to both. Whatever this may result in, consensus or not, we are, by way of potentially doing this, dramatically reducing the paperwork and the costs on IMEs, hopefully employers in turn. Right now, the risk exists. That's the requirement now. Hard copy to both the claimant and their attorney, and so we're not adding any additional pitfalls. We're removing several and just leaving in, and part of it is the human thing too. I mean, my client went to the exam, they slept there for an hour, they sat there for an hour or two. They'd like to see what, and then they'd like to call me and talk about it. And I think that to carve out between the injured worker and their attorney would save a little additional money and create a little additional, or lessen the administrative burden. But again, we're already going a significant way to do that.
Yeah, and one of the things, though,
Quick time in
when
the
we're talking
process,
about...
Either party should have the ability to check a box and say, don't give me paper.
Right,
Print it out.
and my issue for the giving them the option for not having paper is that if you mandate paper, we all know that injured workers move frequently and don't always notify us. You've got a medical document that's going to some address. They may not be there. I'd be concerned about that information being out.
Some
But
portion
is
of the
there any
demographic
change?
doesn't have the ability to print out a document, and some do.
Is it any change from what we have now? Again, we're starting with this is the requirement. We're saying we're going to lessen the requirement and make it a bunch easier. We're not adding anything additional here. We're simply taking away from the burden. We are leaving two vestiges of the current requirement. And again, that's the requirement now. My claimant doesn't get a hard copy, that report's not coming in, no question.
Does
it's
it
a
make
matter of
sense to make
opt-out
it a
versus
default
opt-in.
in the
Why can't,
system?
why can't your client choose to
It's a matter
just
of
take an
opt-out versus
electronic
opt-in.
copy?
Oh, I'm not, I'm
So-
saying,
I think we're approaching
think
6
any-
minutes. I mean, This is something that we can continue discussion on.
So I guess the question is, is there a possibility to build it so that
They
the
can
default
opt
in the
out.
system is always paper?
Right.
And you can opt into the electronic, or you could potentially opt out if you're represented of the paper?
If the default is
Because
paper, you
the
can
injured
opt
worker
out
would
of
have to
paper.
opt out. If they don't, like, to Love's point, if you don't want the paper following you home, you just want your electronic version, is it okay to let them opt out?
The only way, and the only way I would even consider it is if we do it like Miranda, which is you opt out with advice of counsel. You don't get to opt out yourself. Once it, you know.
Well, I mean, we could leave it in, so they could just opt into the electronic. I mean, the system's gonna generate it, and it generates it now. So the question is, do we wanna just say, for now, paperwork is, required for the attorney, and the attorney could maybe have the option to opt out of the hard copy if they wanted to, and just leave the injured workers always hard copy with the option to
You
get
can have
electronic.
functionality to go back in and print it at a later date too, if you, for some reason, opt out and change your mind.
Well,
Well, that exists
the
as
user
soon as
has the
the-
right to opt.
As soon as
Whenever.
as the document gets into e-case, that functionality already exists, right?
Right.
Okay, yeah, each injured worker can have their own e-case access.
Right.
That's right.
So it seems to me that what we're talking about is regulatory changes and process changes at the board, none of which can occur unless the words same day, same manner are removed from the statute.
I think 137
Right.
has to be
That's
amended.
correct. So
So-
that's a critical piece to this. There has to be the legislation to remove that and allow for same day, same manner to incorporate electronic filings. And it would allow us to upload the document, so it'd be there much quicker.
Right, and what you envision with the portal is that as it comes in, the paper and electronic copies are distributed by the board, right?
Through the portal.
Through the portal.
Well, right, through the electronic process.
But what about the paper copy? Maybe that-
So the board system would send out, I think it would be uploaded in, and again, I'll have to go back and, confirm with the IT folks, but the idea would be for the system itself to generate all the electronic copies, and then if there's a flag for the hard copy, that would get printed out like our regular mail does and sent.
And again,
So-
sorry.
That's okay, and so same manner absolutely would have to be changed, correct?
Right.
Yes,
And same day, in a sense.
would stay.
Well, I think we'd have to change it to within 24 hours.
Oh, because our system's gonna print overnight
I mean, why
potentially.
couldn't we take out same day also? Because everybody would have access through the portal in any event. So I don't think simultaneously. So,
Same day, it just becomes irrelevant.
With the mailing.
If it's uploaded
right,
by the IME or IME entity to the portal, it's uploaded one time, and then the board system generates the emails or.
Right,
We
but for
just
the-
have to understand technology-wise, if it's a batch job overnight.
Right, that's the thing.
That's what we're
So the
saying.
injured
But if
workers
it's-
copy
if
would
it's a
be
real
mailed out
time-
overnight,
I
what mean?
imagine it's gonna
Sure.
be built real-time, but if for some reason it's a batch job that runs overnight.
And I would envision it would be a batch
Yeah,
job.
we
But
have
the
to allow for
statute,
that.
but the
Talk to
statute
your
right
technology
now
partners on
requires that the IME do the service. And it's the IME or IME entity that has to do the same day, same manner service. That, not the board.
well, in a sense, wouldn't it all still be the same in the sense that the IME entity will now upload everything to the portal, which will be the same day, same manner to everybody essentially. And then the board will then,
You could mandate, though, that the IME entity has to mail it that day.
Okay,
No,
upload
because
and
that-
mail?
Upload
is-
and mail.
is-
You could do that.
And that's what I had envisioned.
Okay, so you
Again,
could do that.
Yeah, I wanted to be
And then you don't have to worry
very-
about our batch. You would say they have to mail that day, the day they upload.
Well,
So
that,
no, I
that
think
actually
that
is
doesn't
not the
alleviate
direction
the
I was
burden.
going.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Let the board do the mailing.
What I was envisioning is that the upload of the IME ends the IME's obligation. And then the document is fully available to everyone with e-case access, and it's broadcast to parties of interest, in particular the claimant's counsel, carrier.
Let's check with Steve on this.
I think, but the issue is gonna be the hard copy, right? So getting the hard copy to the injured worker. Whose system's gonna
So
generate
that's,
it?
I also have a question unrelated to the IME piece, but what is it gonna cost the board? Right, we're shifting a cost to the board, and, you know, if you're gonna increase the assessment, then great. But if you're going to can a couple of FTEs, or, you know, cut back somewhere else to make up for what could be a real expense, you know, we have concerns with it.
But I think just the automation of allowing that to be uploaded, that efficiency in and of itself would take care of.
Yeah, you might recall there were about 30% of duplicate submissions. So, you know, we would have savings there.
It would save on scanning
Right.
costs, and you would
Right.
it would
And
also.
you think the savings would be significant to recoup the mailing costs?
Because we're just sending the hard copy to potentially the injured worker and their attorney if they
attorney, yeah.
choose for the hard copy. So we could just set it as a default automatically that the injured worker. And we could check at the system, like, I just need to get the functionality straight about who's got to send that hard copy. I think what this committee is being asked to consider is if the decision is we can change it to not necessarily be same manner, then that allows that electronic functionality, and we could just say that they have to provide a hard copy, you know, to the injured worker and their attorney if they choose for that, and that everybody else could get the electronic notification that the document's available. So I think that's the ask. We can figure out the mechanics for everyone, with the understanding that, you know, the intent is, the IME entity, if they're gonna be the ones to mail, it has to mail that day. And if it's the board, it would be like the overnight upload. So we just have to figure out logistically how that works.
But it
But
sounds like there is maybe consensus on
I remain-
the topic.
yeah,
but
I remain
just
open to it.
Exactly how it was done.
But before I commit, I would have to understand how it's gonna work.
Well, I just need to understand what the concern is, because if we're just saying that the injured worker is gonna get a hard copy with the option to get an electronic copy, whether we mail it or the IME entity mails it, that's the remaining question. I'm not sure what the difference is with who mails it.
Well, Mary Beth, I think my understanding of your initial sort of drawing of this was that the board would mail it, and I think that would be far superior, because it would, otherwise you have the IME entity still has the potential for them to drop the ball.
That's right.
Then we get a conclusion, despite the fact that everybody had it in electronically. I think that'll cause a lot of frictional costs, whereas the board just gets it and does it. I think it's all good.
And if I represented IME companies, I would feel the same way, right? They have an obligation now. We're removing that obligation potentially, and before I commit to being okay with that, I want to understand, is it going to be that the board is going to take on this responsibility, or is it going to be the IME is going to retain, you know, a quarter or a third of their responsibility and you know, be able to use the upload to get rid of a sixth of it?
So my point before.
Or two-thirds of it.
My point before was that giving a burden to the board, it makes sense to me simply because I think that even though we're removing a certain percentage of the burden, there's no question about it, I think that it actually leads to greater confusion as to the responsibility, and it's more likely that there will be a mistake. That's my greatest concern. It's not, you know, even though 75% of the burden has been lifted on what has to get sent out, it's when that gets missed, the consequences thereof, and I'd much prefer, and I'd be far more comfortable if this burden fell on the board, because, just exactly following what Mindy had just said. You know, it's the same end result, right? I mean, the injured worker has it in hand, if that's what need be, but there aren't conclusions based on clerical errors.
Yeah, but it's not the same. I mean, from my perspective, it's not. You know, is it?
I mean, I'm asking honestly.
Are you making it, you know, are you making it more efficient for these companies to operate at the expense of the board? Right, so we heard that this efficiency would probably more than make up for it. Yeah, but if the employer pays the IME company, right?
Yes.
The IME company sets their rates, right?
Yes.
If the employer here right? You're saying that the employer would pay through
assessments.
through additional assessments.
Sure.
I-
Well, although we just heard that they
But
won't.
I think, so all of these forms would be electronic now, so we're scanning every page all the time. So I think that just the efficiencies of designing this in an electronic format would definitely offset a lot of the potential costs going out.
It could also remove frictional costs that result from delays in the scanning process. And I'll give you a concrete example. I had a hearing where an IME report was due 3 days before the hearing. At the time of the hearing, it was not in the electronic case file. A week later, it was, and it had been filed with the board 4 days before the hearing. So it had been filed in a timely manner. It wasn't there at the time of the hearing, so it was precluded, which caused me to write an appeal, which caused a board panel to have to say, no, it was there. It has to go back to a hearing to be considered. So there was a lot of friction in that.
There's also instances where I've got to prove that my IME company mailed it on time, so we're delaying the proceeding because I have to get a statement from the IME company, I have to get a sworn statement, they may have to come in and testify as to this, so we're prolonging litigation because of that.
They just don't want to be fractionally penny wise and foolish.
Well, the other thing I think is that this also results in delay. And delay is not necessarily beneficial to any party at the board. Because as Matt pointed out, if you have to appeal and then wait for a decision, you know, you're delaying the entire process.
So we're probably over our 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Do we feel we have any level of consensus on allowing electronic submission to the board, uploading? And then we could be responsible for sending out the paperwork, you know, to the injured worker and to their attorney, and giving other people the option to get electronic or paper.
Yes.
Okay.
Consensus to reach the digital age,
Yeah.
but I hear some reservations on
What do you mean by other people?
particulars of the process.
If that's
the
the
carers get
doctors within
copies.
6 months, are you talking
Well,
about those? They get the electronic.
They get the electronic,
Okay.
that's right.
But we can build that functionality into the BIS, so.
Okay. So do you,
So it would
To
turn it
accomplish-
statutorily into a filing requirement rather than a service requirement.
Assuming
Okay.
it was, assuming it was cost neutral or better, can we say that?
I don't know. Because it's still a cost that's currently borne by the employers through the IME companies that's going to be borne by the board. I mean, to suggest that the board can as easily increase assessments as IME companies can increase what they charge the employers, I think is or the carriers is preposterous.
But I think with.
So I think that we're, I think that. Please don't interrupt. I think that it's something that I'm open to, and I'm open to continuing the conversation on, but I'm a little bit hesitant to commit, especially being that we don't have the actual language, right? Or if we're gonna make a statutory recommendation, right, we should see some language.
Well, that's my question. So if
I
we
think that it's
think we have
I need a
consensus,
cost-benefit
we could
analysis.
put together the language, proposed language, and get a cost, because every page we scan is, I forget how much. So if we're just talking about mailing 2 versions, potentially 2 copies, versus scanning all of those pages for an IME, I think we could probably do a cost benefit for you.
I appreciate it. I want to be clear, I'm not committing, but I'm open to it.
So let's put this as a to-do for the next meeting. We'll try to get together a cost benefit. We will also try to put together draft language so that you can see it. Because I do think to the extent any of these consensus items require a legislative change, part of this committee should put forth what they think that legislation should look like. So we'll take a shot at putting that together and bringing it back for one more discussion at the next meeting. Okay? So we'll do cost benefit and proposed language.
That'll be the legislative and regulatory.
Yep.
Okay, so the next item is a waiver for notice, which is done on IME 5. As you may recall, Regulation 11.2D1 states that the claimant shall receive notice posted by the United States Mail of a scheduled IME examination at least 7 business days prior to the date of such examination. We discussed allowing claimants to waive the 7-day requirement by written consent if desired in any case. And then there was a discussion that the board portal could potentially also provide opportunities for expediting notice requirements to claimants. So this topic is whether there are any scenarios where we could allow a claimant to waive the 7-day notice provision.
Yes. Agreed.
Any disagree?
This one I'm less comfortable with.
Worth continuing discussions, or we're not gonna get you there?
I think we should always continue to talk.
TikTok, Joe, TikTok. So,
One more on this.
Waived if represented?
I don't think I would even consider it for unrepresented workers, possibly represented, but I think we should continue the conversation.
So what are your thoughts, Joe? What do we need to flesh out for you?
My concern here is that we're gonna have an injured worker whose lawyer wants to get something done. They want to schedule a hearing for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, and they're gonna get browbeat into showing up at an IME in an hour from when they get notice. So that's just one possible scenario. I can think of 100. I mean, this is my concern is, the injured worker here, the 7-day requirement is there for a reason.
One side has 7 and one doesn't, right, David? I thought there was differences in some you can waive, you have the right to waive, and some you don't, right?
Yeah, well, the only one you currently have the right to waive is on the C4 auth, the authorization for special service over $1,000. So I was actually going to ask, if you don't mind, Justin, not to put you on the spot, but have you seen that process subject to abuse, confusion, or anything like that with respect to this 7-day waivers, or does it just not happen very often? That a carrier approaches and asks?
I've had it once in 20 years, and so I have to say it's just not asked of me very often.
Any other comments from the other committee members about whether or not?
Can I just say, there are circumstances where, and then the one I'm thinking of, sometimes claimants don't live here in New York, but are actually coming to New York. And it would be very helpful to be able to schedule an IME with their consent. Sometimes they would even like to have that IME while they're here in New York, either visiting or seeing their own doctors. And if we don't know about it in advance, it would be extremely helpful to be able to schedule that IME right there and then, obviously with their consent. So that is one scenario that concerns me and would be very helpful to do that.
Can we compromise and word it that the 7-day requirement can be waived if all parties agree? In this way, forget browbeaten, because anybody can be browbeaten, but these people should be able to stand up for themselves. For the represented claimant, let's put a can in so we can move on.
I mean, I thought that was
just
what a
we don't have
waiver was.
consensus on that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the proposal that you have reservations about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we have May, yeah.
So let's say for now we have no consensus. And we'll just do one last check at the next meeting, how's it?
Okay, so the next item had to do with the IME 4, and it is a filing waiver. So we discussed allowing claimants to waive the 10 or 20 business day filing requirements for IME reports, 10 for in-state, 20 for out-of-state. These timeframes are set forth in regulation, section 300.D2, D14. Some agreed with the proposal, others felt that a waiver could delay medical care. Also, there was discussion that depending on the timing of the waiver, granting a filing waiver could be unlikely if the report disagreed with the claimant's treating provider. So the topic is, should we allow represented claimants to waive the 10 or 20 business day filing requirement if desired?
And just as a prefatory remark, I would harken back just mildly to the opening topic of our discussion, which was the fact that sometimes there's some editorial comments in here, and I'll bring this up when I submit my comments, but I do take issue with the phrase, only 88% of IMEs are received by the board on time. I don't know that I think the word only is appropriate in front of 88%. And I'm going to leave it at that, subject to whatever else the committee wants to discuss, but I will be asking that the word only be stricken ultimately.
Okay.
I wish you'd been the person reading my report cards as a kid.
There's no way to strike non-compliant.
So, any consensus on this one?
We do have another topic which relates to the filing waiver, but it's on a case type. So we'll go through each case type. This is sort of a blanket waiver to allow a claimant to waive the filing requirement. The subsequent discussion, actually.
Are you talking about B?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not
modify,
right.
not waive. Yeah.
Okay, so the first question is, do we allow it to apply to all types of cases?
Well, does the claimant have, I'm just confused, does the claimant have to agree in advance or after the fact?
Well, we can put that clarification in if the
Right.
committee wants. Does
And
it
I-
make a difference if it's in advance or after the fact?
In terms of this
It does,
blanket?
yes.
No. I will not agree to a blanket extension of the time for IMEs under any circumstances.
Okay, so I think we're pretty clear there's no consensus on that topic then. Okay.
Wait, what if it was late and it's favorable to the claimant, you wouldn't agree?
Can we write that into the regulation, which is, if the report arrives late and it's favorable to the claimant is given the option of allowing it to be admissible, but may
Well,
otherwise...
But practically speaking, that is the current state, because you just won't make a preclusion motion.
Okay, well, there it is.
Okay, so that's a no consensus.
Okay, so the next item here is to modify, not waive, the 10 or 20 business day filing requirements by case type. The proposal on this topic was to modify by case type. There's 10 case types that have identified. Under this proposal, in circumstances where time is of the essence, the filing requirements would likely not change. For other case types that don't adversely impact the claimant, the filing requirements could be relaxed if the committee agrees upon it. So I'm gonna separately go through each of the 10 case types for discussion to see if there's any agreement whether the filing requirements could be revised. So the first is a controverted claim.
No.
No.
Any other discussion needed on controverted claim? Move on?
And before we move on, I just say,
Yeah.
I know you're gonna go through all of them, but the envision, I think, is really for these modifications to be on the second page, the F through J's, and not 100% on F through J's, but just some of those on F through J's.
Okay.
But I think the no is gonna be heard for A, B, C, D, and E. That's my guess. With the possible exception of some of the C, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the C, depends on the
Okay,
condition.
medical only variance.
And let me introduce
Yeah.
one more concept in here, which is that separating these other than into case type of established or non-established is problematic because it assumes that every IME has a singular purpose, which is not the case. Many IMEs address several of these issues. There could be an opioid issue, there could be an authorization for service issue. The carrier might be asking about degree of permanency at the same time and possibly apportionment. And so I think you have a hard time when you start dividing these up and saying yes and no, unless you somehow come up with a hierarchy of precludability, which I think is near impossible as well. So I just want to point that out generally.
Well, we could also say, if this is the only issue, you know, and then you could waive it. Like, if that's the only single issue, but if there are like numerous issues, then you couldn't waive it.
I think the thought behind this, Justin, is if it's something basically that's carrier initiated as opposed to carrier responsive to an existing from the claimant or judge directed. And so, like, if you have any one of those issues, so if you have a variance where you have the tight time frame in there, and they're also somehow going to address, ongoing degree in the same, even though they might say, we're the ones who are initiating ongoing degree of disability to possibly do a suspension reduction, and we're going to lump it into the variance. The fact that the variance is such a tight time frame as governed by regulation would really prevent it from being a modification being applicable in a case like that. So I think sort of like if any of these are not carrier initiated, they could not be modified, I think would be basically the standard. That make sense?
Yes.
I think we'll have to go through them one by one, and after it might make sense. But
Okay, so the second one is medical only variance. I guess in David's example, that's not carrier initiated.
Yeah.
meaning the timeframes are set by regulation.
Yeah.
And mind you, I just want to add one thing to that. I still don't entirely see what the enormous problem is here. I deal with the state insurance fund on 1,000 cases or 10,000 cases a year. They have an internal medical management department. They get me my answer back. I mean, they do. And so I still think a lot is being made about the fact that this is a regulatory requirement that can't be complied with. It is if the carrier is willing to comply with it. But that said, pardon me, we'll go through the list.
It's not a question of the carrier, it's really a question of the IME company being able to comply with it, and it is somewhat challenging. I think I think the doctor has been able to speak to that sometimes it takes more than the 10 days. You have to remember that includes administrative time as well. My only point is, I think the idea is that we'd like to litigate cases, and not even litigate, but cases to proceed on the merits. When you have more information, it's better, and to just bump them out because it's 10 days as opposed to 12 days, I think is sort of a pity.
I understand.
So, moving on from variances, I think it's a no there. Opioid weaning.
No.
So just to understand, or to say this, what we're talking about here is it's a carrier-initiated process. So the prescriptions are continuing. The carrier is seeking to initiate the process through the RFA2, which includes an IME. So in other words, it's not, the delay is initiated solely by the carrier as opposed to affecting the claimant in the immediate sense. I mean, whether it's a yes or no is fine. I wanted to explain that.
So, just to follow up with what David was saying, I would be in favor of that, and particularly for the very reason that I've discussed in the past, where there's no prejudice to the claimant until we have that report and nothing's going to happen. If it takes us 10 days or 20 days or 30 days, it's sort of, I think that it has to be timely in the sense that it's still relevant and still an issue. But other than that, it seems to me that why wouldn't you just let it go in whenever the claimant, the IME puts it in? I'm not suggesting it should be 30 days, but I don't think there's any prejudice to a claimant under these circumstances.
I think we're still in no.
Okay. Authorization for services costing more than $1,000.
Nope.
Award determinations, so causal relationship, additional body parts, consequential body parts.
Nope.
Okay. Also, award determination, ongoing degree of temporary disability.
Nope.
In the carrier initiated.
Carrier
So-
initiated.
Just to be clear, so we're not talking about a response to, to the ongoing issue of degree of disability where the judge directs an IME or where it's in response to a claimant medical. This is the carrier basically getting the IME that will, depending on how it comes back, if it comes back showing a lower degree of disability, would be attached to an RFA 2.
Understood, but
Okay.
there are cases where carriers are making voluntary payments where, and some carriers barely do it when there's a voluntary payment. They'll make a payment up till the date of the IME and not any further, because they want to make sure they're not overpaying the claimant. So I still find this problematic and do not change my opinion.
For permanency classification, either partial permanent or permanent partial or permanent total.
And again, this is where the carrier is going first, as opposed to reacting to the claimants or being directed by a judge.
No.
SOU determination, where the carrier's going first?
No.
Why is that a no? What's the difference?
Because I think when you begin parsing out who is initiating the IME and the purposes, it is going to sound well-meaning, and in practice, it's going to be difficult to implement, and that's my reason.
Apportionment?
What's the downside?
Yes.
What's the downside to the claimant?
I'm sorry?
What's the downside to the claimant again?
As I mentioned a moment ago, I think that while relatively well-intentioned as stated, in practice, it will be implemented in a poor way that can be used against the client. And I don't know that I can fully give you all of the various permutations of what I can come up with, but I would be happy to think about it and come up with some examples. I have an issue with the IMEs being given more time. I started when it was 10 days, and we went to 10 business days, and that's been the case for a long time. And that's my perspective.
Okay, the next is apportionment.
Unless directed by the judge.
No.
And then records review, such as causality in a death case or for opioid weaning.
And those would be separate. It would really just be the opioid weaning, again, as initiated by the carrier. Again, just by way of explanation.
No.
Chorus.
Right.
Well, ask the same question 10 times and get the same answer.
Okay, the next item was to modify the request for information filing, IME 3. As you may recall, in the utilization study, roughly 71% of IMEs performed have one or more IME 3s associated with them, either before or after the IME. Workers' Comp Law 137(1)B requires an IME provider who has performed or will be performing an IME to submit a copy of the request for information to the board within 10 days of receipt of the request. Depending on the timing of the scheduled IME, the IME provider may be required to acknowledge receipt of the IME 3 prior to the due date of the IME 4 report, which could add to their administrative burden. We discussed a proposal to modify the statute to allow the IME provider to submit the IME 3 acknowledgement along with the IME 4 report. There is a handout. In handout number 2, page 5, there's a diagram of the current process, and this proposal would eliminate the acknowledgement portion, which is the section in red. So if you want to refer to that diagram. I could bring it up on the screen, but I think it's sideways. I don't know how much help that would be. So, in the diagram, we would be eliminating the section again that's in red where the IME provider is sending a signed acknowledgement of receipt of the request for information back to the IME entity. IME entity is sending it along to the board, and instead that acknowledgement would come in with the IME4.
Does the portal have any impact on this process? Or would it?
It could.
So in other words, when the IME is requested, everything's going through the portal in any event.
I notice also, at least in the report itself, Section 4.3.2, volume of IME forms, interestingly and perhaps rightfully, considers within the same paragraph the modification of both this issue and the modification of the IME5 or questionnaire, the intake questionnaire, which I posed at a previous meeting and suggested. I never got copies from anyone as to other suggestions that might be applicable. I'm going to maintain my position that IME questionnaires should be flatly forbidden as being admissible as evidence in any event. But I still would like to consider the idea of standardizing and simplifying the questionnaire form in conjunction with whatever else we may discuss under the heading of volume of IME forms currently required by the board.
On the IME3, is there any, I'm asking practitioners, is there any value to this as it stands, or is it just superfluous?
The IME3?
I think the IME3 may have outlived its usefulness.
Is IME3, I'm just pulling it up on the internet, just the form that we sign in two places?
Yes.
With the claimant's name on it?
Yes, but the rules are seemingly, and we literally did an hour CLE at our last IWBA meeting on the IME3 form and how it's used, and we still didn't come to a consensus. The face of it does seem somewhat confusing, albeit I don't know that it's entirely outlived its purpose because it is still the vehicle for addendums, and that's the only thing I would keep harping on is.
So this proposal would not affect the addendum piece of it. It's strictly affecting the request for information that is coming before the IME.
The reason I think it's outlived its usefulness is that when it was originally published and used, it was the cover sheet for all of the medical documentation that was sent to the IME, which included, in many instances, or some instances, or most instances, duplicate filings. And there came a point in time where penalties and fines started to be issued for duplicate filings. So, at this point, I see IMEs using only documents that are already in the board file. That's why I think that it's outlived its usefulness.
So it is used today to either convey questions that the carrier has that they would like the provider to respond to. It's used to submit additional documentation to the IME provider for them to review as part of the IME, and it's also used to respond to any questions that have been asked. So multiple purposes, but is also in statute that they have to. The IME provider has to acknowledge receipt of this communication within 10 days.
Can I just ask a question though? So the goal, I think, of the form is to kind of understand what the carrier is asking the IME doctor to do and what documents are having them look at.
From a doctor's perspective, this form takes me less than 2 seconds to sign. and say that I received the information. It doesn't take much time, but in terms of my office, faxing back and forth and all the other administrative stuff, I'm sure it's more work than they need to do. But if it's required, it doesn't take the doctor's time, and getting rid of this would not help us. It would help our offices in faxing, but it would not help the doctors, and would not convince more doctors to do IMEs.
But if you think about the IME form, if we went to the electronic process, the carrier would be initiating the IME request and listing out, what information or what questions they had. So that would be incorporated into the form, so everybody would see it, right? So I don't know that this necessarily has a purpose anymore, or at least the 10 days is kind of irrelevant in the electronic world.
It'll be moved.
So I just want to at least raise that concept, because I think the question, the ask for the committee was, does it have to be within 10 days? But if we're going to move to more of an electronic process, then it's just another piece that everybody will see through the process. So when the doctor finishes his report and sends it back, then they can certify that this is all they saw and all they were asked, if that's the goal.
Wouldn't it be important if you're sending documents to the doctor, I suspect you would have to upload them to the PCF, to the board's file, so that everybody could have access to review what the doctor reviewed?
Yeah, so it would all be contained, right? If they're
Right.
not already there. I mean, a lot of them are already probably there, but.
Right, usually they're all there, but in the event you have something in particular you want the doctor to look at, I would imagine it would be appropriate to upload it and have it.
Into the-
Exactly, so, and as long as the doctor articulates all the documents he reviewed, I think that should be, sufficient.
So the reason this is an issue, if it was just a form thing, we could just administratively tweak the form, but this is a statutory change that needs to be addressed if we're gonna do it. I guess that's why we're asking the question. We can figure it out, what the intent is in the process flow and how and why we want the doctor to sign off, but this would have to be a statutory recommendation out of the committee to fix.
Well, again, I think the portal sort of alleviates or addresses this issue, so
But
maybe
the-
that's another reason to fast track the portal.
Right. Did you have some?
But the portal can't address this issue unless the statute's out of the way.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
So
So it's kind of a
that's why-
formality.
So do you want us to come back with
Anyone object to it?
a proposal to
The
tweak the
language would
language?
probably be that, all the information in the request for information must be
In the portal?
available
Right.
in the form and format prescribed by the chair,
Right, so we could get to the same purpose, but it would just be, we take out the 10-day requirement and just say it would be addressed through the form prescribed by the chair.
And we can bring that
Why
language
not?
forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the next item is.
Standardization of the IME
Oh,
questionnaire.
You want to do
form.
that now? Okay. So the
Seems like we
claimant
reached
questionnaire, yeah. it
near
makes sense.
consensus last time.
Yep.
Well, your consensus saying what?
That we should simplify and standardize the form in a fashion exactly or somewhat similar to my proposal as we had all discussed at the last hearing.
I don't know if we were near consensus of that, but we were definitely,
Okay.
you were presenting it,
There were two people that objected.
yeah.
Maybe the rest didn't raise their voice. I could have been.
I mean, in any event.
Okay. Yep.
I mean, on standardization, I mean, on the topic in its entirety, I don't know if I want to speak to it, but in the form that you had presented, which I appreciate that you're doing, I had some concerns. So, I mean, one basic concern is that it pretty much just addressed, and I recognize someone's at an IME because they were injured, but there's literally no medical background whatsoever for an IME doctor to work on that claimant. You're going in completely blind, only learning about the accident, right? And I think that there's a place, I am far from a doctor, but I think that there is a place for some other medical background that would be appropriate.
So my thought in that regard, and the reason I purposely left it off,
Yeah.
and I'll give the same example to the group, and I'll be brief, that gave to Mr. Nolte last time. When I was a rookie, and I was working for Mr. Mead over here on the carrier side, I asked a claimant in a hearing 5 separate times, maybe 4 separate times, did he have any injuries subsequent to the one at issue? And he said, I don't understand. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And finally, the judge, Judge Romeo, a delightful man, said, Justin, why don't you ask him if he's had any injuries after that? And I said, oh, well, after. And the claimant said, oh, yeah, absolutely. 3 weeks later, I fell and I stubbed my toe. So this is not an intent to excise that from the IME, but I will forever maintain that the IME is a medical examination. It's not an examination before trial. It was never meant to be. And a doctor is not prohibited. This form does not let the doctor not ask those questions. The doctor can ask any questions necessary of my client to whatever extent, and if it costs 2 to 3 more minutes in the exam, so be it, but it forces the verbalization of what's happening. If my client doesn't understand the question, if the doctor says, do you have any past relevant medical conditions? My client can say, what does that mean? What does relevant mean? What do conditions mean? What do past mean? And the doctor, before committing something to writing, which ultimately, well, of some benefit, I'm sure, to the doctors, again, can be obtained in other forms and is utilized universally as a fraud tool, a litigation tool for my clients who are not always as articulate as lawyers and doctors. Again, I'm not saying that the doctors cannot have any information that they want. I would just like my client, who's had a 40-year background in lifting bricks and carrying steel across a beam, to know what he's answering before he's accused of fraud by some rookie attorney like me looking at an IME questionnaire and finding a bare discrepancy. You want to reduce frictional costs in the system by focusing litigation and ensuring that these medical exams are utilized for their correct purpose, which is a true medical exam, an opinion on behalf of the carrier, and take away 90% of the unnecessary litigation, which is a frictional cost. This is how to do it.
Well, it strikes me that the issue is plain English rather than which questions are asked.
Okay, and that's fine. I mean, but
No objection to plain English. I mean,
and I'm not absolutely above a modified form. My problem is, we sat here last time or the time before and looked at a 5 or 6 page questionnaire that went through every piece of medical history since the person was 2. And I don't deny that there are relevant pieces of this puzzle and pieces of the story that the IME needs. An honest, competent doctor, I would not want to go into a case not knowing my client's past legal history. It's just, it's such a frequent discussion and creates frictional costs where perhaps the frictional costs were not intended to be there. If someone's going to lie, they're going to lie. But if they don't understand the question, and again, a young buck rookie litigator wants to take that to the board, then we're doing a fraud trial over something that may have been a bare misunderstanding. And so, again, I'm not opposed necessarily to having a modification of the form, but the standardization from various forms, some being the equivalent of a life insurance questionnaire, to something more suited to a culture and a system generally designed to deal with people who are laborers, I think is fair, and that's...
if we ever got to a form that the committee could agree on, how does it, is this just, it's something that exists in every IME doctor's office?
It could be a board form, just like the IME 5. And again, I understand someone's going to say that we're adding additional paperwork, but the additional paperwork in this idea is not a burden to the medical provider. The carrier would be responsible for submitting a board standardized, available on the website, IME 5 form, just the same way all the other forms with the IME 5A or whatever, with the IME 5 notice to the client. The client fills it out ahead of time or does not. And if not, then yeah, the doctor in the office prints it and says, I'm not doing the exam until you fill this out, and the board does require it. So please fill this out in 15 minutes in the lobby, and they do, and they have the questionnaire, and then the doc says, and in addition to this, I want to know every treatment that you've ever had to your right shoulder since the day you were 2. My client can't say I'm not answering that, or he's not being at all cooperative with the exam. It's just that the question is being posed as it needs to be, rather than something that gets glazed over ultimately and picked up on in perhaps inappropriate circumstance. And I'm not saying that, but, well, that's that.
Justin, I'm sorry, just a quick question. So if we were to, let's say, come up with language that everyone could agree on, right? doesn't necessarily address the second part of your concern, which I think is the bigger concern, is that it can still be used to impeach a claimant, even if it is in plain English, even if it uses the words like after, you know.
Well, and if this panel is willing to consider the alternative proposal, which I actually do deem more applicable, that Joe brought up, to absolutely and completely forbid the use of an IME questionnaire as admissible evidence as an addition to D43, I would take that as well. And that probably would solve all of the problems attendant to this. And if the doctors agree, it would let them use whatever form they want to, whatever they need. And maybe that allays the concerns. The doctors get their forms, whatever information they need. If it's 5 pages, I'll tell my client to fill it out. I don't care what it says, it's for the doctor's use and no one else's.
And I'm sorry, I don't understand. They're going back to saying that they can give them whatever questionnaire they want?
But it would not be admissible as evidence in any workers' compensation proceeding. The doctor's report would, the doctor's testimony would, the questionnaire would not.
But the doctor theoretically could testify. The claimant indicated on this questionnaire that X, right?
No, I think that would be using the questionnaire for evidentiary value. I think the doctor would need to.
Can I just, when you go to your own doctor, I don't know about you, but I know that you fill out forms that indicate your current problem, your other medical
Oh, no, you're
condition.
absolutely right, but I'm not going to my own doctor for him to take something away from me.
But you know what, I think you're being a little bit unfair, frankly. You're asking IMEs to do an IME with like really one hand tied behind their back. And I'll tell you something else. You know, you keep saying that this is used for litigation purposes and for fraud purposes, but the fact of the matter is, we have cases where there are frauds. And I'm sorry to say it, where people had an accident 6 months earlier and got a large schedule of $50,000 and then don't report it. So I don't think this is a real one-way street. I think if you have a clear questionnaire in language that seems to be pretty, and don't underestimate your claimants, because I think they can generally understand the questionnaire. But I thought your suggestion to have it sent out with the notice of appointment, that I think that they can call you if they need some assistance with it. I don't see what the objection is here. I think this is a legitimate diagnostic tool and a way of determining if whether in fact something is either causally related or degree of disability. And I will tell you that I have seen cases where our IME doctor says, I think this is a concern for X, Y, Z reason. Maybe you have to investigate some other health concern. I mean, I think it would be a shame to miss out on that opportunity as well. It doesn't happen often, but it could happen this way.
No, I'd feel terrible if you missed out on that opportunity to take something away from my client as well, truly.
Don't say that, Justin. You know,
Well, but that's what you're saying. You're couching it in neutral
saying
language, but that's what you're
claimants have
saying.
an obligation to tell a full history and to be honest and to be truthful.
And they can do it verbally.
All right, let's get back on topic. You know, as a doctor, my thoughts are I want the claimant to fill out a short form to guide me in the oral examination. It helps me. It assists me in getting information more efficiently than me going through all these questions. Whether it's admissible or not admissible, you guys can debate, but for me, it's invaluable for me to have them fill it out for 5 minutes before they walk in and sit down with me. And I make it as reasonably good English as I can use and so they can understand it, because it helps me if they can fill it out correctly.
And most respectfully, of all the people that this would ever be directed at, you, sir, are not the issue. It's not you I'm worried about in the way it's being done there. It's the 5-6 page questionnaires being done by the people that perform 5,000 of these in a year that are being used as examinations before trial. That's what these are being used for, and that is not proper.
And that's why I raised my issue, right? Because I think that's your larger concern.
I suppose it is.
There's a way that we could decouple,
I mean,
I submitted my questionnaire. I don't know if that copy was received. Did
oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Forgive me.
Yeah, I don't think I sent that out. I apologize. I can send that out after the meeting today.
Would you mind? And then maybe I will add something to this. Add some add something simple, plain, straightforward, unmistakable English that doesn't, not for 1 second rob you of your preliminary background tool, but eliminates the witch hunt that the 5-page questionnaire is undoubtedly designed to do. And I'm not going to deny that there are injured workers who are not as honest as the bulk, the majority, the vast majority of them, 99% of them. But at the same time, I don't know that creating, as Joe said, a out-and-out trap is necessarily reducing frictional costs. In fact, I believe it's adding dramatically to the frictional costs in the system, and I've seen it not every day, but for the last 2 decades on this one issue. And so we come up with a new questionnaire, simple, plain, straightforward. Doctors can use it for the value that it is for medical exams, and it is not used as a trap for my client. I'm in.
All right,
I think that's great. I'd like to weigh in on this, if I might. I don't use a questionnaire, and I don't for a number of reasons. One, and a lot of claimants are accompanied to my office for an examination, and their attorneys frankly don't want them to fill out a form, and I can understand it. One, it's subject to interpretation and misinterpretation, so I don't like it. As a physician, I've already reviewed the medical records. I know what body parts are involved. I have an idea as to what the sequence of events were. I will ask certain pertinent questions. What are your present complaints? When did you last see a doctor? And things like that, as well as 1 or 2 lines as to what happened, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a judge. I'm looking at a medical question, and I will respond that way. And when we talk about a document, if we agree to one, there are standards. I would suggest that we have it expressed in 4th grade language, and there are systems and processes out there to make sure that's the level it is. And then we have to worry about bilingual or bilingual or trilingual or what else. How are we going to address that? That will be another 2 weeks of discussion. So I've walked away from them. I find them to be burdensome, and that my responsibility before walking into that room is know what it is that I'm looking at. But it brings up the other questions. I'm aware, and perhaps not under the workers' comp realm, of other pertinent items out there that I don't have. How do I ask for them? How would I do it other than my report say, please send me a report of the x-rays or the EMG or the description of the fact that he went to see Dr. Black 4 weeks before the visit. I'd like to know what he found. Things like that. How do I go about getting that information?
I really agree with Dr. Goldberg. It's his right as the doctor seeing that patient for IME, that claimant for IME, that he doesn't have to have them fill out a questionnaire. And I think any doctor who wants to use a questionnaire should be allowed to, and those who don't have to. And I think that's important. You have to have your own way of documenting, getting a history that you're comfortable with, and I think that's really important. But for me, getting the history in advance does help me.
And I would never...
That way I don't miss anything.
I would never suggest forcing a questionnaire on any physician. I would rather they not be utilized at all, and I applaud the doctor for taking an oral history and committing it to writing. No disrespect to anyone else intended. I use various tools myself. But then again, perhaps back to a simple, standard, straightforward 4th grade language questionnaire that is something that physicians can live with, that provides them the necessary information without lending themselves to a litigation trap, or again, just something. And I give my clients a lot of credit. Trust me, I believe they're all wonderful people, and many of them are extremely intelligent, but they don't have my vocabulary. They don't.
I don't want the attorneys to fill the form out in advance either, because that will be a big headache for me, because it's going to be much too long, too much documentation, too much information, and some of it's going to be irrelevant. So my preference to have the claimant fill it out at the time with their attorney present is fine, so I can go through with them. But I don't want them all coming in with 10 pages of written history done by the attorney.
And
so do we want to talk, I'll send around Dr. Weinstein's version and yours, Justin, again, and talk about having a voluntary questionnaire, but if one is used, it would need to meet, it would need to be in Word form, whatever that looks like. And we can sort of table this for one more conversation next time.
So, in the interest of time, right, you told me TikTok. I think we should hear, if the employer and insurance folks are open to this, let's do it and do the work. If they're not, let's not spin our wheels.
Agreed.
We're not going to get consensus on this. Not consensus, unanimous.
Okay.
On
what form
Yeah,
would
so
look
let
like.
me just ask a simple question. Do people object to using a standard questionnaire?
Voluntary use of a standard questionnaire.
I
Well-
can't actually answer it right now.
have to
and
see
I have
it.
to go
Alright,
back
so-
and talk to folks, but I mean, I'm hearing that we're not gonna reach consensus anyhow, so.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out, like,
It
if
may not be
it's,
hinging on me anyway, so.
Can you send out my questionnaire and then we can discuss it briefly? And if anyone objects, we'll just say no consensus could be obtained, which probably will be the case.
okay,
And
so we'll
that's fine.
revisit.
You can have no consensus at the next meeting.
Okay. So we'll send both, Justin's and Dr. Weinstein's, and we'll see if we can figure out where we're at.
So the next item was reasonable travel time. We discussed whether there should be regulations regarding the time or distance that an injured worker must travel for the exam. In the injured worker survey, 29% indicated that they did not feel that the medical office was convenient or accessible. The committee talked about travel time, rather travel distance should be considered since there are geographical discrepancies across the state. In handout number 3, we gathered information regarding the current IME entity guidelines that are in use regarding reasonable travel distances. There's also analysis of the injured worker survey where we looked at the distance in time to travel to the IME provider as opposed to their treating physician. And statewide, the travel times to an IME appointment versus the treating doctor is about 3 minutes longer. So the question for the committee today is, should we have regulations out there regarding reasonable travel time or distance, and if so, what should they be?
Yes,
Yeah, and 45 minutes for both is reasonable.
I would go for 30.
Okay.
Wait, excuse me, 30 minutes is reasonable travel
You
time?
can't.
30 minutes, yes.
You can't practically.
No, I object.
Not even in the city can you get to.
Yeah, it's not practical in places upstate either.
So, I mean, we have the averages here. They're all under 30, right?
Yeah, but Joe, if you're in a rural county.
35? I'll give you 35.
If you're in a rural county and there's not a doctor.
So what's your recommendation?
Are those averages?
I don't know yet, but it's not 30 minutes, because it's literally impossible in some places. Impossible.
So,
I think an hour is probably
If the subway runs
possible.
slowly, you're in trouble.
And I've never, I
Makes
lived in
no
the city
sense.
for years, everything takes longer.
so you
than
think
a
an
half
hour, is an hour reasonable?
I think an hour is reasonable. I'm not committing myself to it yet. I think an hour is reasonable, but I think that we need to look at, and if we have to bifurcate this upstate, downstate, I'd be open to discussing that as well. But I think that, you need to look at a map, quite frankly. You need to look at where there are providers in upstate counties and there are human beings living, because that map might not say that 60 minutes is even enough.
So I think this is really two issues. One is what's reasonable, and two, what happens if it's unreasonable, right? No?
Yeah.
Say more, what do you mean, because?
Well, I mean, I think reasonable is 30 minutes, right? That, in my mind, it doesn't mean if it takes 35 minutes, the IME doesn't happen,
I see.
right? But maybe instead of reimbursement, we could get, for travel time between 30 and 45, we get that injured worker the cost in advance. For travel time in excess of 45, maybe the carrier's got to arrange the ride, something like that. It's not that it doesn't happen.
Is it pre or post? What if there's a specialty that is very unique?
I mean, we can't, I'm
Practically
not
speaking,
suggesting,
trying to promulgate rules around this?
And an accident on the West Side Highway. And,
I'm not suggesting
Or they drive 60
that
minutes to their own
it doesn't
doctor.
happen, right? Penalty of death, but I think that we should have some
And then what, the IMEs
help
all
here.
together if they had to go
And I
some
think
help
that-
here for the injured worker.
What about the idea of, instead of saying reasonable travel time, we talk about reasonable distance?
The
It doesn't really
materials,
work.
the materials I read actually said that was probably the worst way, and these are the materials in advance of today's meeting, were probably the less easy or less successful way to look at that, because those are much more variable than time. And again, I'm not discounting it, just we
You taking
kind
the
of.
4 train or the 6
Well,
train?
what about?
I
what
take
about
the
if you
87
make
north.
it-
I think there's a couple of things that,
What,
go ahead, Nini,
what
I'm sorry.
what about a separation between in the city and upstate? I think that in the city, the distances might be much smaller, but I don't see why it would be that variable, or why not consider how far they travel to their own doctor?
Well,
You're gonna
I
probably
think that
rules
that's.
around zip code. Administratively, procedurally, it's not a workable solution.
And I looked at the study, and the treating and IME distance times and time, travel times seem to be about average or coordinate with each other, but, sorry.
Let me ask this question. So, are there ways to help alleviate working around traffic, so one of the things that we had discussed, or someone had discussed, was giving the opportunity to allow for IMEs to happen on office hour times. So if you were allowed to schedule an IME, for instance, at 7 o'clock, and I'm not saying that this isn't something that would have to be in agreement with, with the injured worker, but if you were to allow it at 7 a.m. or at 8 p.m. or on a Saturday or a Sunday even, you might be able to alleviate that travel constraint. I think if we're looking for something reasonable, I think we should also look at that to be, a little bit more flexibility, and come up with a more creative sort of solution. Because, we're not gonna get consensus. I think probably in 90 whatever % of the cases, I'll agree with you, 90 minutes or 60 minutes, I'm sorry, is probably perfectly fine. But there are other cases that by no fault of anybody, it's just gonna be an impossibility.
No, I said 30, you said 60.
Fine, but I'm saying 60 is my, that's like where I'm starting, and I'm not going down. But, I think that if we wanna actually address this, and we can walk away from it because we don't have to address it, but if we want to address it, I think we need to address the other issue as well.
Well,
Because I think they're married.
I think again,
Other
we
issue,
should,
like-
we should get an.
Just the availability,
idea here.
if it's,
Is this worth our
having
time
them
to discuss?
9 to 5.
Based on
And
how
there
far
is-
apart we are, I'm not sure we're gonna get to any kind of consensus.
Except that he just threw the flexibility, so
Yeah.
building in more flexible hours, but by consent
So-
of the parties.
I think my written submission had different relief at different thresholds. One was they get the travel expenses in advance. One was the carrier arranges for travel. Another, after a third, threshold, the injured worker had the opportunity or the option to have the exam conducted at a place closer to their home or in their home. I'm willing to think creatively about this, and I'm not suggesting a death penalty at 30 minutes. But if you don't think we're going to get there, then we shouldn't bother.
Well, there's a,
Practically speaking, I don't see how we're gonna get there.
and that's a fair answer. I would just respond to you, Joe, that there's an opportunity, I think, that if we were to say 60 minutes, for instance, and you were to call me and say that my IME is at X place, I think, 99% of the population will pick up their phone, put it on the map, and it can tell them exactly the distance and the time it will take to travel. And they could simply say, sorry, that's 68 minutes from my house, find me another place. We don't need to get into a whole.
Well, that's
I don't like-
precisely
I don't
why
like
I
driving on
said,
highways. I
yeah,
wanna stick to secondary roads.
Say it again?
Somebody could say, I don't like driving on highways, it
What-
scares me, I'm gonna stick to secondary roads.
I'm just saying,
you're
getting
throwing up
into a
roadblocks. If
graduated-
you're not interested, you're not interested.
I mean, it's
You're throwing up roadblocks, and if, like I said, if you're not interested, you're not interested.
All right, so, no
Right, so
consensus
But
on
having
this.
said that, that's just one subsection of this conversation, but what Lev said was about adding more flexible hours, the option of that. How do we feel about that? Because that's something that we did discuss, and I think everyone mostly agreed on that. So if the parties consent, can they do it on a weekend? Can they do it after hours?
Well, I'm for it.
And I remember when we had this conversation, everyone was kind of open to it, but I don't know. Maybe
If
we've
it's
been
with
So
into
what would
there's
this-
no harm.
Maybe
How would
upon
this-
consent of the
if we
parties.
were to-
Today from our
right now, it's
provider
just-
doing, there's no preclusion today, is there?
I thought we could do it.
Well, there could be,
with
actually,
consent
yeah.
With consent.
It has to be within,
Oh, that we could, you could do that.
it has to be within regular business hours.
I can't do it.
That was
Regular
it, so
business hours
extending
defined as a
regular
statute,
business
right?
hours.
Or is it just regular business
If you
hours?
define-
It's verbal?
I think, I can't tell you what the litigation points on it.
As a
At
practice, I don't
5:30
think
has
it's being
been
done
argued.
on the weekends or,
No, I'm sure, no, it's not.
so, if you open that up, my God, when banks started staying open on certain days of the weekends, it changed my life.
Just that many
Would that
more
be a
opportunities to
sign?
realize you have no money.
Not in a long time, but then it changed my life. Car dealerships. Anyway.
No.
So if it was Monday to Friday, normal business hours unless otherwise agreed to by the parties,
And
is
it-
that satisfactory? Because I can envision, you know, if you're doing it 7 AM, if an IME entity sends out a IME 5 saying, this is on Monday morning at 7 AM, that I'm gonna start to get phone calls about that. But, you know, I mean, there are times when people who are working don't want to take time off from work to get examined by an IME, and those folks might,
They would do a Saturday morning
they
potentially.
would do a Saturday morning and they'd do it 7:30 at night.
Yeah.
I also think doctors would love to do it on a, you know, Saturday, well, not love, but they would do it on a Saturday
You might
Saturday
get more
morning.
folks in the system that way.
Yeah, if, you know, after hours, Saturday morning, and especially, both my kids are out of the house now in college. I wouldn't mind giving up a Saturday morning, I'm not going to soccer games anymore, so why not, you know, do that on the weekend or 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night, and it'd be easier traveling for me and for the claimants.
So it sounds like it's something we could explore. We're not sure if it would necessitate a regulatory change or a statutory change, but should we research that and get back to the group?
The statute just says reasonable business hours,
Yeah,
so.
I saw it. So it would be in regulation, by regulation. Okay,
And
so we'll
wait
get
time?
back to the group on that.
Yes, so the next item is wait time. Okay, so we talked about whether there should be regulations related to wait time in an IME office. For the workers who were surveyed, 27% said they had to wait more than 30 minutes in order to be seen by the IME provider. There were several discussions that included whether wait times at a treating physician's office should be used for comparison, what the procedure will be as far as rescheduling, what happens if the injured worker chooses to leave because of an excessive wait time. And discussions also covered geographical distances with the assumption that longer wait times are more common downstate compared to upstate. So the question for the committee is, you know, similar to travel time, should there be any regulations related to reasonable wait times?
Yes, 30 minutes.
Absolutely not, and certainly not 30 minutes. How many people said they had to wait for more than an hour on the questionnaire? Because I don't have it here.
I don't think we had, I think we said less than 15, 15 to 30, and greater than 30. So 27% were greater than 30 minutes.
But we have no idea how long they actually had to wait, so it could have been 35 minutes or 40 minutes.
Correct. And it's based on their perception as well.
Anyway, I don't think this is necessarily an issue. I think if there's a problem, let the claimant report it, their attorney report it to the board and let the board investigate.
No consensus on this one?
I just wanted to throw out a reminder, the perception might be from the time the claimant shows up, but that claimant might be 45 minutes late when they first come, and then they've already missed that time, and if the doctor agrees to see them, they may consider that they're waiting for the doctor when it really isn't. So there's a lot of subjectivity at play here, very difficult.
I would be fine with limiting it to injured workers who arrive on time.
No, I think that 30 minutes is unreasonable and absolutely.
Do you have a recommendation for a longer time period?
I have sat in doctor's offices when I was pregnant for more than 2 hours to see the doctor, so no, I don't think so.
But you never sit more than 9 months when you're pregnant.
That's like when it catches the who.
I think that the comparison to a treating doctor is a false dichotomy here. You know,
It really is.
treating doctors, one, have an obligation to the patient. Number two, there's a customer service aspect. If you run a really crummy office, unless you are a stellar physician, you know, you're going to turn some patients off, and they're no longer going to visit you for for care. Here, the injured worker doesn't have that opportunity, so I don't think that it's really a fair comparison.
But to
Okay,
that
I think
point,
3 hours-
we all wait excessively long, and the people are supposed to be doing customer service. So to expect it to be
I
quicker,
wouldn't say that we all wait. I mean,
you've never waited.
I'm not saying that I've never waited.
If you waited, then we've all waited.
You make it sound like everybody waits 2 hours for every doctor's visit
That's not
with their
true.
treating physician.
Sometimes it happens.
So, are there one-offs? Yeah. The other thing is, I see my treating physicians more than once or twice over the course of a litigation. I have regular physicians. So there's that aspect as well. If you wait 2 hours for someone who you normally wait 2 minutes for, then that's a one-off.
I had a 7:45 doctor's appointment 3 mornings ago, and I waited 45 minutes first thing in the morning. So, it's just, we're never gonna come up with a time period that's satisfactory. It just
I think
isn't.
the only
Administration
consensus,
is gonna-
the only consensus we'll be able to reach is that ideally, they should wait less than 30 minutes to an hour. And it's not a hard, fast rule, but I think we can recommend, try not to make people wait more than 30 minutes or an hour.
And I would add that
Who's
if
going
the
to
wait
administer
time
and how's
is
it
an
going to be
hour,
administered? And does it become a point of fact later on? So is the doctor going to put a punch machine in his or her office? Is it when you walk in the door? Does the time start when you approach the desk? Administratively and practically speaking, I don't see how you can execute this.
So we have 2 more topics, and we have 21 minutes. So I'd like to move on. It doesn't sound like we're going to come to consensus on reasonable time. The next proposal that was brought up a couple times over the last year was to allow physicians access to the board's, I guess, the portal or our system so that they could see all the medical records that were on file. So currently, Regulation 300.2D3 requires that IME providers may only consider medical records that are in the case folder. Additional medical records can be sent to the board and to the IME provider or entity for consideration using the IME 3 that we discussed earlier. Then there was also discussion that a board portal could be used to upload these additional medical records. So again, the topic here is, providing full access to physicians to the medical records in an individual's case file. I don't think it's technologically feasible right now,
No, I have
but.
part of our new system.
Right.
And that was going to be the one caveat before any form of agreement, is I would object to viewing the entire ECF, because that often contains ancillary documents, legal and otherwise, at times witness statements that should not have a
Right.
bearing on
So
it.
I think the recommendation is to allow providers to have access to the medical records contained within a case folder, and that's it. And that would have to be the recommendation that the new business information system being developed provide that access, because it's not something that we can't split that out today.
Right,
So it would have
right.
to be, designed and contained, so that would have to be a future
And we
recommendation.
would have to build in like a HIPAA release in there as well, probably.
Not if it's a doctor.
No.
If it's a doctor, look at the medical records.
I think this would be very helpful for a lot of reasons, so I agree with David.
I think this would be good, and it would prevent the IME entity from cherry picking the records and let the doctor take a look at what's there. Because there may be some things that are very important for the claimant that would otherwise be unknown to the doctor.
Would the board, in accordance with a couple of the past discussions, be willing to maybe come up with something of a feasibility, some feasibility information for the next meeting? And then we could, because if it's years down the road, then I don't know if it's realistic for this committee anyway, but.
Yeah, let us get you, because I think it's envisioned as part of the new BAS. It's something that we've looked at, giving that window in and like what access. So let us figure out like what's envisioned as part of the new BAS and what the timing is.
It would also be helpful to fully understand what the difference is between now and the proposal.
Well, now they have nothing.
They
Because
have
it's
Only what the
nothing-
carrier sends them.
Right,
Okay.
so you can't go into
So-
our system as a physician and see documents.
So is that it? It's just the ability to access it through the system? Is there anything that the carrier has access to that they are not permitted to share with the IME that they would now get as a result of this? Or is it
Well, the-
just
the
an
structure-
administrative hassle?
It's just for the provider who wants to see a more complete medical history and now has to rely on that carrier or IME entity to send them everything. And what Dr. Goldenberg has said in the past is that then he finds out about something and there's a lot of back and forth, like, can you send me this, can you send me this?
I think that today, you have access to like all of the relevant documents or nothing. So both sides have access to whatever's in that case folder. You can't limit a doctor. If the doctor were given access today, they could see the same thing that everybody could see, and that's, I think, objectionable for people. The expectation for the new system is that the build will be like a medical-only tab, if you want to think of it that way, that a doctor is given access to see all medical records in that tab to do whatever it is they're going to do, whether they're the treating or the IME. They would have access to all of those files.
So right now, this proposal wouldn't grant an IME access to anything that they don't already have access to. It's just a matter of granting it through the board portal or granting it through the carrier.
I think that's incorrect.
So then help me understand.
The way I read this as drafted is that it will provide access to the entire medical file, whereas currently all the information, so let's say there's 50 medical documents in the file, only 6 of which are relevant to what's being asked of this IME doctor for this time. The way this proposal is written, it would give access to the 50, whereas the current system about what is sent to the doctor is the 6. And there's no way to have this, I don't think, the access to the 6.
So then who determines that the 6 are relevant and the other, 44 on it?
The carrier.
It's what the carrier lists as being, again, the as-is what the carrier lists as being the 6.
So then the carrier could list all 50. Now,
That could happen now, that
Yeah.
is
So-
correct, but
Very
it
clear,
doesn't.
they never do
It
that.
doesn't, because there's 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions on an IME. Unless you're talking about the initial, controversy, in which case it's okay.
But also, I mean, not only do they have to list them, they have to provide them.
Right,
yeah.
right, they have to provide.
There's no access.
But I think more of the
Yes.
doctor's concern, and I did a deposition on this not last week, and again, this, I think, supports the notion that more competent and more, reasonable IMEs are better in the system. And I don't remember which carrier it was, but they sent the doctor everything but the first 5 medical records in the file, which evidenced the nature of the injury. The doctor wrote back and said, I'm not going to say causal relationship because I have no record whatsoever in the entirety of this guy's treatment that he ever complained about the neck. Well, you know what? It was in the first 5 medical reports. The cross-examination was 3 questions. Doc, if I show these to you and you assume the truth of them, do we agree that you're not in a position to deny my client the treatment? And the doctor said, yeah, in fact, I feel pretty blindsided right now. Not by you, but by whoever sent me these records. And no, this is too important and I'm not making any decision. And the carrier's attorney said, well, Doc, can't you kind of think? And he said, no, I'm not, you didn't send me the records, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing it. Send them back, give me the records, and I'll give you an opinion. And so I will say that right now,
And that's what we're saying, that there might be some cherry picking in the system, and that's why it's being raised by the doctor as, it would be helpful if there was, to eliminate that cherry picking if they could see it all, the medical records.
Frankly, as a practical matter, it would be a lot easier for both the insurer or the employer and the IME entity. I think it would be much easier administratively as well.
So we'll come back to, for the next meeting with the feasibility through the biz and what that might entail.
Okay.
There is one additional topic that we said we would discuss today, and that's fraud. Again, the Inspector General's office gave a presentation at the last meeting. We had the general discussion about fraud. Are there any recommendations that we should consider for the report that you have, and that we'll make consensus on, that deal with fraud prevention, monitoring, anything related to fraud?
yes, I have one. I fail to understand why 13A6 makes it a criminal offense and a misdemeanor for any person to attempt to improperly influence the medical physician of any physician, parenthetically, me or anyone else, attorney, client, or otherwise, and why 137.6 says that if you cause, direct, or encourage an IME report to be submitted which substantially differs from the doctor's opinion, it might be considered fraud and might be referred as a fraudulent practice. It seems a bit disparate to me. I think it should be a crime. If one is a crime, why should the other not be a criminal offense? Same conduct.
Comments?
Here, here.
Anyone really
Anybody
strenuously
else?
object to that?
Which
That's-
way do you want to do it? Do you want to make it not a crime
For everyone or a crime for
or a
everyone?
I wanna
crime for
make it-
everyone?
I wanna make it a
Which way
crime
is
for
it?
everyone.
You want it to be a crime for everyone?
If I'm not mistaken, there's the possibility that something is a crime and also something that there's just repercussions on the claim. Isn't that accurate?
I suppose a prosecutor could try to bring a common law fraud prosecution. Maybe not, I don't know. Or if the board, and no, let me ask. If the board does not delineate a particular offense under its law or the statute as being a criminal offense, does a prosecutor have the ability to say, I don't care if the comp board says that's criminal or not, I'm going to prosecute it as criminal. I'm not a criminal attorney and I don't know, but I still don't see why, if it's a crime for one, it shouldn't be a crime for both. And especially altering an IME report, which for those of you, and I was not around in the year 2000, was almost the entirety of the purpose of 137. That's
Well, I
why we
think-
have same day, same manner, so they couldn't be altered and sent to different people on different days with different reports.
While there are some crimes listed in the comp law, I think most of the prosecutions that take place in this area stem from the penal law.
Okay.
So it
And
doesn't,
I guess you could say that is, I mean, would if you can answer, would the Fraud Inspector General's office prosecute that as I don't even know if that's what.
No, they refer to prosecution.
Sorry, okay, so you refer, all right. I still don't see why there wouldn't be parity between someone improperly influencing an attending doctor and an IME. And I don't think
So-
the penalty should be less, it should be greater.
The question on the table is, would people consider putting the same, take out the optional language and put in the same language for interfering with an IME as we have for interfering with a treating physician?
And remember, I'm
interfering
sure.
with, right, it's the alteration.
Alterations, okay.
And obviously, nobody party to this conversation would ever engage in such conduct in any event, so what is there truly to worry about?
I would have to look at the language very carefully again before I.
So why don't we
All right,
send the
just,
language?
if I may, it's 13A6 and 137, 13A6, subdivision, I'm blind, 6.
Those of us who don't know how to look that
13A6
stuff
and
up, could you
137.
please circulate the language?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we'll
Yeah, we'll circulate it.
Absolutely, sir.
Is
Thank you, thank you all.
that 13-A6? Or
Yes,
is it 13
yes.
something?
13-A, paren 6, and 137, paren 6.
Okay, we'll send that out.
All right, I think that,
One-
so includes.
I'm sorry, one more thing. One of the things that we talked about was, last time, was giving the board more leeway to get some of these folks who are engaging in nefarious behavior off the rolls, right? Whether it rises to the level of illegality or criminal action or whatever it is. And I thought that we had that conversation in the context of the fraud discussion, and I'm interested to at least continue the conversation on that. Whether or not the board or the folks here would be interested in giving the board the authority to take a look at the substance of these. Maybe if the medical director's office received a certain number of complaints about a particular IME entity, IME provider, or carrier, or self-insured employer, when it comes to the IME realm, that the board would then be empowered to conduct an investigation and make some determination shy of the authority that it currently has.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the physician members suggested that that was a good idea.
Or perhaps the treating physician as well, Joe, would that be accurate?
It
Well,
would
this is
if-
the
if-
IME,
right.
this is the IME
Yeah,
discussion.
it would if this committee were addressing fraud within the treating system, which is not what the legislature directed, and luckily, not within our time frame.
Luckily.
I mean, that's something.
Well, I
we
mean,
all
if they,
need to,
again,
right, I
if
guess.
the
Yeah, I mean, we
legislature
don't have a
constitutes a
specific
separate
provision
committee
about-
to study
about
that, we can come back.
Quality standards being the basis for
Oh, I
removal
see.
specifically, but, you know, we do have the authority to take steps to suspend. If we may believe there's misconduct, this could be interpreted as misconduct. We have the authority to then seek removal. And we have some specific grounds for removing from the list. This isn't one of them, yeah.
So that
Okay.
would be statutory.
You know, and this, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In my mind, it maybe not even rise to the level of you know, a penal response, maybe just a remediative response.
Yeah, I'm talking about our
You know,
administrative
that-
authority. Yeah.
That somebody, you know, could be remediated instead of punished, or at least right off the bat.
Okay.
So is there a regulation change that's needed,
Yeah.
or what?
It's
what do you-
statutory.
Oh, it's statutory.
So we'll take a look at the language in it.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I will be sending out the 2 versions of the claimant questionnaire following this meeting, as well as the Word version of the IME report. We are asking that you take a look at the IME report and send us your comments in a marked up track changes way by October 18th. We will then compile all of your comments and get it back out to you by November 1st. We will be meeting again on the 13th and, you know, go through line by line the resulting draft IME report. And then December 12th is the last scheduled meeting currently for this group. And ideally, we would like to review and approve the final IME report at that time.
So I just want to make sure I have this correct. For the next meeting, we also have some other decisions to have to make. So one is the attachment of the survey. We're going to revisit that at the next meeting, right? We are going to come back to you with same day, same manner, statutory language, and we're going to give you the cost-benefit analysis on that. We're going to revisit the next meeting, the waiver of the 7-day filing. We had no consensus, but we were willing to discuss again at the next meeting. We're going to look at modifying the IME 3 to change that to be part of the regular IME form if we do the electronic process. We're going to send out the 2 different versions of the questionnaire and decide whether or not we're going to get consensus on putting out a standard one if they're going to use one. We're going to look at expanding the hours to include nights and weekends. We were going to come back to you on the feasibility and timing for allowing access to doctors for the medical reports. And then we're going to come back and send out the language on the fraud provisions for 13A6 versus 137 sub 6. And then removing doctors from the system, we would come up with a potential statutory change for that. Catch everything?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we look forward to getting your written comments back, and we will get our stuff put together for you as soon as possible.
Stephanie, when do you expect
All right, meeting adjourned.
to have